Mason Reed had 48 hours to live. Not from illness, not from enemies, but from the suffocating emptiness that had been slowly killing him for years, a loneliness so profound that even his 8-year-old son couldn't recognize his own father's voice anymore. On Christmas Eve, sitting outside a freezing cafe while the world celebrated around him, the 32-year-old billionaire made a decision. If nothing changed by midnight on Christmas Day, he'd disappear. Sell everything. Vanish. Start over somewhere his money couldn't follow. Then a 6-year-old girl in a torn winter coat asked him the question that would either save his life or destroy what was left of it. Stay with me until the end of this story. Drop a like and comment with your city name so I can see how far this journey travels. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Mason Reed stared at the murky reflection in the ceramic cup, watching steam that no longer existed rise from liquid that had long since surrendered to the December air. Around him, downtown Portland hummed with the frantic energy of last-minute Christmas shoppers, families laughing, couples holding mittened hands, children pressing their faces against store windows glowing with promises of magic. He felt nothing. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He felt a particular species of exhaustion that came from years of pretending. Pretending the quarterly earnings mattered, pretending the board meetings filled some void, pretending that when he video called his son Ethan from Tokyo or London or wherever the hell Reed Technologies sent him that week, the distance didn't carve another piece out of both of them. "Sir, we're closing in 20 minutes. The barista appeared beside his table, young and apologetic, probably working a holiday shift to afford gifts for people who actually wanted to see him. Mason nodded without looking up. "I'll be gone soon." The kid hesitated. "You okay, man? You've been sitting here since like 2 o'clock. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, polished smooth from thousands of repetitions. "Just needed some air." The barista's expression suggested he didn't believe it, but he retreated anyway. Nobody really wanted honest answers to casual questions. Mason had learned that lesson early. His phone vibrated for the 100th time. He glanced at the screen. Jennifer, Ethan's nanny. "He's asking when you'll be home. What should I tell him?" Mason's thumb hovered over the keyboard. What should she tell him? The truth? That his father was sitting outside a coffee shop on Christmas Eve, trying to remember the last time he'd felt anything resembling happiness? That the great Mason Reed, the self-made tech billionaire who'd built an empire before 30, couldn't figure out how to have a simple dinner with his own kid without his assistant scheduling it? 3 weeks in advance? Tell him I'm finishing up some work. Home by 8. He sent the text and immediately hated himself for it. Some work. As if Ethan didn't know what that meant. As if the boy hadn't spent most of his 8 years watching his father disappear into offices and conference calls and emergency meetings that somehow always happened during bedtime stories or school plays or birthdays. Mason locked his phone and shoved it into his coat pocket. The cashmere overcoat had cost more than most people's monthly rent. It meant nothing. Snow began falling. Thick, lazy flakes that caught the Christmas lights strung across the street and turned the evening into something from a postcard. Families hurried past his table, wrapped in scarves and laughter, carrying shopping bags stuffed with wrapped boxes and evidence of people who mattered to them. He used to be one of those people. 5 years ago, before the cancer took Rebecca, he'd been the guy rushing home with last-minute gifts, sliding on ice, laughing when she pretended to be mad that he'd forgotten to pick up the cranberry sauce again. Ethan had been 3 then, small enough to carry on his shoulders, young enough to think his dad could fix anything. Now Ethan was 8 and knew better. Now Mason was a stranger in a penthouse, communicating with his son through catered meals and expensive toys and nannies who knew the boy's favorite foods better than his own father did. "Excuse me?" The voice was small, uncertain. Mason looked up. A little girl stood beside his table, maybe 6 years old, wearing a puffy pink coat that had seen better winters. The zipper was broken, held together with safety pins. Her dark curls escaped from beneath a knitted hat with a hole in it, and her brown eyes studied him with the unsettling directness that only children possessed. "Yes?" Mason tried to soften his tone, but it came out harder than he intended. "Why do you look so sad?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. "What the hell did you say to that?" "Sophie!" A woman rushed over, grabbing the girl's hand. I'm so sorry. Sophie, we talked about bothering strangers. But Mama, he looks sad. Really, really sad. Like when you cry in the bathroom and think I don't hear. The woman's face went crimson. She was young, maybe 30, with the same dark curls as her daughter, and eyes that held the particular weariness of someone who'd been fighting too long with too little. Her coat was thin, more suited for October than late December, and her jeans had been mended at the knee. I'm so sorry, she repeated, tugging Sophie away. It's fine, Mason heard himself say. The words surprised him. The woman, Elena, he'd later learn, paused. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. But her eyes were kind, genuinely kind, in a way Mason hadn't encountered in years. She doesn't mean any harm, Elena said quietly. She has this thing about people looking sad, ever since her dad. She trailed off, glancing at Sophie. Anyway, sorry again. No one should be alone on Christmas Eve, Sophie announced, as if this were a universal law everyone should know. That's what Grandma says. It's not right. Mason felt something crack in his chest. Your grandma sounds smart. She is. She's making turkey right now. It's probably going to be dry because our oven is weird, but Mama makes really good potatoes. Sophie studied him with those two knowing eyes. Do you have anyone making you dinner? Sophie? It's a fair question, Mason interrupted. He looked at Elena, then back at the little girl. No, I don't. Sophie's face crumpled with distress. See, Mama? I told you. He's alone. Elena shifted uncomfortably, clearly mortified. You could come have dinner with us, Sophie said suddenly. We don't have a lot, but Grandma always makes extra because she says you never know who might need it. Right, Mama? Sophie, I'm sure this man has, Do you? Sophie looked at Mason expectantly. Have somewhere to be? The honest answer would destroy this child. Mason could see it in her eyes. She'd already decided he needed saving, and the truth would break something in her, that he had a $15 million penthouse waiting, that his refrigerator was stocked by a private chef, that he could eat anywhere he wanted, order anything, have it all delivered by people who'd smile and bow and never quite meet his eyes. That despite all of it, he'd been planning to go home, pour himself 4 fingers of scotch, and stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows watching a city full of people who belonged to each other while he belonged to nothing. No, he said quietly. I don't have anywhere to be. Elena's eyes widened. She didn't mean you don't have to. I'd like to. The words came out before he could analyze them. If you're serious, I don't want to intrude on your family's, we're serious. Sophie grabbed his hand with the casual possessiveness of a child who'd decided he was worth saving. Come on, it's not far. We can walk. Do you like mashed potatoes? Mama makes them with real butter, not the fake kind. Mason stood, letting this tiny girl lead him like she had any idea who he was. Like his net worth hadn't been splashed across Forbes last month. Like he wasn't the Mason Reed who'd revolutionized cloud security and built an empire that employed 14,000 people across 6 continents. Like he was just a sad man outside a coffee shop on Christmas Eve. Which, he realized, was exactly what he was. Elena fell into step beside them, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. I'm Elena, she said. Elena Brooks. And you've met Sophie, apparently. Mason. He deliberately left off his last name. Mason's fine. Well, Mason, I apologize in advance for whatever you're about to walk into. Our apartment it's not much. And my mother can be intense, and the turkey is definitely going to be dry. I like dry turkey, Mason lied. Sophie squeezed his hand. You're a bad liar. That's okay. Mama is too. She says we can't afford Christmas presents this year because of budgeting, but I heard her crying about the electric bill last night. Sophie! What? You were crying. I'm just saying the truth. Grandma says the truth is important. Elena looked like she wanted the sidewalk to open and swallow her. Mason felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward this woman who was mortified by her poverty while he was quietly suffocating under the weight of his wealth. How far? He asked, changing the subject. About 6 blocks. Is that okay? We could take the bus, but walking's good. Mason glanced at Sophie. You warm enough? The girl nodded enthusiastically, though he could see her shivering. Without thinking, he unwound his cashmere scarf, probably worth more than Elena's monthly rent, and wrapped it around Sophie's neck. Oh, you don't have to, Elena started. It's cold, Mason said simply. She needs it more than I do. Sophie burrowed into the scarf, grinning. It's so soft, like a cloud. Is it made of clouds? Something like that. They walked through streets that grew progressively less polished as they moved away from the downtown shopping district. The Christmas lights became sparser. The storefronts shifted from designer boutiques to laundromats and corner markets. The people hurrying past looked less like holiday shoppers and more like folks just trying to get home. Elena lived in a neighborhood Mason had probably driven through 1,000 times without seeing. The kind of place that existed in the gaps between success stories, where people worked 2 jobs and still couldn't quite make rent, where Christmas miracles were measured in small mercies like the heat staying on and the car starting one more time. That's our building, Sophie announced, pointing to a weathered brick structure that had probably been nice in 1970. Now it sagged slightly, as if tired from holding up too many deferred dreams. The lobby smelled like cleaning products fighting a losing battle against old cooking odors and damp concrete. The elevator wheezed and groaned, and Elena pressed the button 3 times before it reluctantly agreed to come. Sometimes it gets stuck, she explained as they squeezed into the cramped car. If the lights flicker, just don't panic. It usually figures itself out. The elevator lurched upward, making sounds that suggested imminent mechanical failure. Mason found himself doing calculations. How much would it cost to repair this building's elevator? Probably pocket change. He spent more than that on client dinners. They exited on the 4th floor into a hallway with carpet that had given up trying to have a color. Elena led them to apartment 4C and paused with her hand on the doorknob. Listen, she said quietly, looking at Mason. I don't know why you said yes to this, and I'm not going to ask. But my mother is going to ask. She's going to ask a lot of questions, and she's not subtle about it. And if you want to leave, I'll understand. Sophie gets attached fast, but she'll forget about you by New Year's and... Elena, Mason met her eyes. I said yes because your daughter was right. No one should be alone on Christmas Eve. And I was alone. So thank you. Something shifted in Elena's expression, the guarded look softening just slightly. She nodded and opened the door. Mama, we brought a guest. The apartment was everything Mason had expected and nothing he was prepared for. Tiny, maybe 700 square feet, max. The furniture was old and mismatched, the kind of stuff you picked up at thrift stores and yard sales. The carpet was worn through in spots. The kitchen was barely big enough to turn around in. But Christmas decorations covered every available surface. Hand-cut paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated with what looked like homemade ornaments, felt shapes, painted pine cones, strings of popcorn. Stockings hung from the windowsill. No fireplace in a place like this. Family photos in mismatched frames lined every shelf. Sophie as a baby, Elena younger and smiling, an elderly woman who must be the grandmother. And the smell. God, the smell. Turkey roasting. Something with cinnamon. Fresh bread. Real food, made by real hands, meant for real people who mattered to each other. Mason's $15 million penthouse had never smelled like this. Professional cleaners made sure it smelled like nothing at all. Who's this? A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was probably in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She looked at Mason the way a general might assess enemy troops. Grandma, this is Mason. He was all alone at the coffee place, so I invited him for dinner. That's okay, right? You always say we should... I know what I say, mija. The grandmother's gaze never left Mason's face. Does Mason have a last name? We didn't really get that far, Elena said quickly. Mama, it was Sophie's idea, and I couldn't exactly, I'm Maria. The older woman extended a hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. And you're welcome here, Mason with no last name, but I'm going to need you to tell me you're not running from the law, or a bad marriage, or anything that's going to get my girls hurt. Mama! It's a fair question. Mason shook her hand, respected the directness in her eyes. I'm not running from the law, and I'm not married. I needed somewhere to be tonight that wasn't where I've been. Maria studied him for a long moment, and Mason had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing right through him, past the expensive coat and the $200 haircut and the watch that cost more than a car, straight down to the lonely, exhausted man underneath. All right then, she said finally. Hang up your coat. Dinner's in 20 minutes. Sophie, go wash your hands. Elena, set another place. And Mason, you can help me in the kitchen. It wasn't a request. Elena shot him an apologetic look as her mother steered him toward the tiny kitchen. Sophie bounced away to the bathroom, already chattering about whether Mason liked cranberry sauce. The kitchen was barely big enough for two people. Maria pointed to a cutting board and a pile of carrots. You know how to use a knife? I do. Good. Make yourself useful. Mason removed his coat, watching Maria's eyes widen slightly at the tailored suit underneath before her expression went carefully neutral, and rolled up his sleeves. He picked up the knife, and for the first time in years his hands did something that had nothing to do with signing contracts or typing emails. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Maria moved around the cramped space with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make do with very little room. She opened the oven to baste the turkey. Sophie hadn't been wrong about the questionable oven. It listed slightly to one side and made concerning clicking noises. So, Maria said, not looking at him, my granddaughter finds you outside a cafe on Christmas Eve, looking like the world ended, and invites you home. Want to tell me what a man in a suit that probably costs more than I make in 6 months is doing sitting alone in the cold? Mason's hand stilled on the carrot. That obvious? I've been cleaning houses for rich people since before Elena was born. I know a custom suit when I see one. I know a Rolex when I see one. And I know a man running from something when I see one. She pulled the turkey out, prodded it skeptically. Question is, what are you running from? Myself, mostly. The honesty surprised them both. Maria glanced at him, her expression softening a fraction. That's the hardest thing to run from. Yourself always knows where you're going. Yeah, Mason returned to the carrots, cutting with more precision than they probably required. I'm figuring that out. You have family? A son, Ethan, he's 8. Where is he tonight? At home, with his nanny. Maria made a sound that might have been disapproval or sympathy. And where's home? The Pearl District, penthouse. He might as well be honest. She'd already seen through him anyway. Ah. Maria was quiet for a moment, adding butter to a pot. And you're here instead of there with your boy on Christmas Eve because I'm a coward. The words came out harder than he intended. Because it's easier to run a billion-dollar company than figure out how to talk to my own kid. Because his nanny knows him better than I do, and I don't know how to fix that. And sitting in that penthouse pretending I'm not failing him felt worse than sitting alone in the cold. He stopped, slightly horrified that he'd just said all that out loud. Maria dumped the carrots he'd cut into the pot with the butter, added something that smelled like rosemary. $1 billion? Give or take. Huh. She stirred the pot. And you still don't know how to be happy. That's gotta sting. Mason let out a sound that might have been a laugh. You have no idea. Oh, I've got some idea. You'd be surprised how much rich people tell their housekeepers when they forget we can hear. She tasted the carrots, added salt. The thing is, Mason with the $1 billion, money's like a microphone. It makes whatever you already are louder. If you're lonely without it, you'll be lonely with it, just in a nicer apartment. That's depressingly accurate. I'm old. I've earned the right to be depressing. Maria turned to face him fully. Now let me ask you something, and I want a real answer. What are you doing here? And don't tell me Sophie invited you. Adults don't follow strange children home just because they ask nicely. What do you want from my girls? It was the question Elena had been too polite to ask. Mason met Maria's eyes. Nothing. I want nothing from them. I needed to be somewhere that felt real tonight. Somewhere people weren't performing for me or trying to impress me or pretending to care because I signed their paychecks. Your granddaughter looked at me like I was a person, not a net worth. And that's the first time that's happened in, I can't remember how long. Maria studied him, her face unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. All right, I believe you. But hear me good. Elena's been through enough. Bad marriage, bad divorce, barely keeping her head above water. And Sophie, that girl's got a heart bigger than sense. They don't need someone who's going to drift into their lives and drift back out when things get complicated or real or boring. I understand. I hope you do. She turned back to the stove. Now make yourself useful and set the table. Plates are in that cabinet. We use the good dishes on Christmas Eve, the ones from the thrift store that don't match. They're special because we decided they are. Mason found the plates, a mismatched collection of patterns and sizes, and carried them to the small table in the main room. Elena was there, spreading a tablecloth that had been patched in several places. Survived the interrogation? She asked with a slight smile. Barely. Your mother is terrifying. She's protective. We've had a rough few years. She doesn't want Sophie getting hurt. I don't want that either. Elena looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. Mason saw the wariness there, the practiced defense of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. But underneath it, something else. A tiny flicker of hope she was trying very hard not to show. Just don't make promises you can't keep, okay? She said quietly. Sophie already decided you're staying for Christmas breakfast tomorrow, and probably New Year's, and possibly her birthday in March. That's how she is. She collects people who look sad and tries to fix them. Like her mother? Elena's cheeks colored. I wasn't trying to. I meant it as a compliment. Oh. She smoothed the tablecloth unnecessarily. Well, don't compliment me too much. I'm only doing this because Sophie would have cried if I said no. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Elena had the same look in her eyes that Sophie did, that determination that no one should be alone on Christmas. Like it was a personal failing if someone in her orbit was suffering and she didn't try to help. Mason wondered what it was like to be that kind of person, to see someone else's pain and feel compelled to fix it, even when you had nothing to spare. Dinner! Maria called from the kitchen. Sophie came running from her room, still wearing Mason's scarf. Can Mason sit next to me? If he wants to, Elena said. I want to, Mason said, and was rewarded with a grin that made something in his chest hurt. They gathered around the small table, 4 people in a cramped apartment, eating food that probably cost $20 total to make. The turkey was indeed dry. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. The green beans had come from a can. It was the best meal Mason had eaten in 5 years. Not because of the food, though Maria's cooking carried a warmth no 5-star restaurant had ever managed, but because of the way Sophie talked with her mouth full and Elena gently corrected her. Because of the way Maria told stories about Elena as a child, and Elena groaned but smiled. Because of the way they argued good-naturedly about whether cranberry sauce should have chunks or be smooth. Because they were a family. Broken and patched together and barely making it, but a family. The real thing. And Mason sat among them, a stranger wearing a suit that cost more than their rent, and felt more at home than he had in his own penthouse in years. So Mason, Maria said, passing him the potatoes for a second helping. What do you do? For work? Elena shot her mother a look. Mama, we don't have to. I'm in technology, Mason said vaguely. Software development. Security systems. It wasn't technically a lie. Oh, like computers and stuff? Sophie asked. That's cool. My friend Jake's dad fixes computers. Is that what you do? Something like that. Do you make a lot of money? Sophie! Elena looked mortified. What? Grandma always says it's important to know if someone can support themselves. That's why she keeps asking you about that guy from the diner. Sophie, eat your turkey. Mason bit back a smile. It's okay. Yes, Sophie, I make enough money to support myself. Do you have a big house? Sophie, I have an apartment. It's probably bigger than it needs to be. Do you have a pool? No pool, just windows. A lot of windows. Windows are boring. You should get a pool or a trampoline. Do you have a trampoline? I don't, but now I'm thinking I should. Sophie nodded seriously. You should. Everyone should have a trampoline. Mama says we can't have one because we live on the 4th floor, and also we can't afford it. But if we lived in a house, we'd totally get one. Right, Mama? Elena had her face in her hands. Sure, baby, totally. Mason watched her across the table. This woman who was working herself to exhaustion trying to give her daughter a life she couldn't quite afford. Who was mortified by her poverty but too proud to pretend it didn't exist. Who had let a strange man into her home because her daughter asked, even though it probably terrified her. What about you? Maria asked, her gaze sharp. You got family besides your boy? My parents passed a few years ago. Car accident. And my wife? He paused, the words still difficult after all this time. Cancer. 3 years ago. The table went quiet. Sophie's hand found his under the table and squeezed. I'm sorry, Elena said softly. I can't imagine. You must miss her. Every day. Mason looked at his plate. I think that's part of the problem. I've been so busy missing her that I forgot how to be present for the people still here. Like your son, Maria said. Not a question. Like my son. That's fixable, you know, being a bad dad, or a distant one, or whatever flavor of not good enough you think you are. Maria's voice was gentler now. It's only unfixable if you don't try. Grandma's right, Sophie said. You just have to try. That's what she tells Mama when Mama cries about money. She says as long as we keep trying, we'll figure it out. Elena reached over and tucked a curl behind Sophie's ear. That's right, baby. They finished dinner with easier conversation. Sophie's upcoming school play, Maria's soap opera gossip, Elena's coworker who kept trying to set her up with his nephew. Normal things, small things, the kind of things that made up actual lives. After dinner, Mason helped clear the table despite Elena's protests. In the tiny kitchen, he washed dishes while she dried, their shoulders bumping in the cramped space. Thank you, Elena said quietly, for being kind to her, to all of us. You didn't have to stay this long. I wanted to. Mason handed her a plate. Your family you're all really wonderful. We're barely hanging on most days, but we appreciate the compliment. She dried the plate with more attention than it required. Can I ask you something? Sure. Earlier, outside the cafe, Sophie was right. You looked really sad, like deeply sad. Are you okay? No one had asked him that in years. Not really asked. Not with genuine concern, instead of polite obligation. No, he said honestly. I'm not okay. But tonight helped. More than you know. Elena nodded slowly. Good. Because Sophie's already planning your Christmas breakfast menu. She's going to be devastated if you don't show up. I'll show up. You don't have to just because I want to. He met her eyes. If that's okay with you. Elena looked away, but not before he saw something uncertain and hopeful flash across her face. Yeah, that's okay. We eat at 9, if you're serious. I'm serious. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. In the living room, Sophie had pulled out a battered Christmas movie on DVD, some animated thing about a reindeer. She patted the couch insistently until Mason sat down, then immediately curled up against his side like she'd known him her whole life. This is the best part, she whispered as the opening credits rolled. The part where everyone's sad but doesn't know it's about to get better. Maria settled into an armchair with her knitting. Elena sat on Sophie's other side, close enough that Mason could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, probably from a drugstore, nothing like the expensive products in his own shower. The movie played. Sophie provided running commentary despite having clearly seen it 100 times. At some point, her chatter slowed, then stopped. Her breathing evened out. She's asleep, Elena whispered, smiling. She always does this. Gets so excited about movies and then passes out 10 minutes in. Mason looked down at the small girl sleeping against him, one hand still clutching his sleeve like he might disappear if she let go. Something inside him cracked wide open, some wall he'd built brick by careful brick over the last 3 years. Can I tell you something? He said quietly, not looking at Elena. Okay. Before I met Sophie tonight, I was sitting at that cafe trying to figure out what the point was. Of anything. I've built this empire, made all this money, achieved everything I thought I wanted, and I'm more alone than I've ever been. My son barely knows me. I barely know myself anymore. And I was just so tired of pretending it mattered. Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. And now? Now I'm in a cramped apartment with people I just met, watching a movie I've never seen, and a 6-year-old who's decided I'm worth saving is asleep on my shoulder. He finally looked at Elena. And I can't remember the last time anything felt this real. Their eyes held for a long moment. Elena opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. Real is messy, she said finally. Real is bills you can't pay and broken elevators and dry turkey. Real is disappointing and hard, and it doesn't always work out. You can't just step into our life because it feels good tonight and then step back out when you remember you're a billionaire or whatever you actually are. I'm not a... Please. Elena's voice was kind but firm. I've been poor long enough to recognize expensive when I see it. Your watch probably costs more than I make in a year. Your shoes are custom. Your coat is cashmere. And the way you hold yourself, you're used to people saying yes to you. Mason didn't deny it. I don't care about the money, Elena continued, but I care about Sophie. And she's already attached to you. She's going to wake up tomorrow expecting you at breakfast, and next week she's going to want you at dinner, and by New Year's she's going to expect you to be part of her life. And when you leave, because people like you always leave places like this, it's going to break her heart. What if I don't leave? Everyone leaves. There was a story there in the flat certainty of those words. The father who'd abandoned them. Probably others who'd promised and failed. I'm not everyone, Mason said. That's what everyone says. Maria cleared her throat from her chair. If you two are going to have a meaningful conversation, take it to the kitchen. Some of us are trying to watch the movie. Elena stood, careful not to wake Sophie. Mason followed her to the kitchen, where they stood in the tiny space that forced them closer than either was probably comfortable with. Look, Elena said, crossing her arms. I appreciate what you did tonight. Really. We all needed to be reminded that not everyone in the world is awful, but you have a life, a real life, with your son and your job and whatever billionaire things you do. This was nice, but it was an escape for both of us. Let's not pretend it's more than that. What if I want it to be more than that? Why? So you can feel good about yourself? So you can play savior to the poor single mom and her kid? I've met guys like you before, Mason, rich, lonely, looking for something authentic to make them feel human again. And then real life gets boring or complicated, and you remember you have a whole world up there in your penthouse, and this was just slumming. The words were harsh, but her voice cracked on the last sentence. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. I lost my wife, Mason said quietly, 3 years ago. And instead of dealing with that, I threw myself into work, built the company bigger, made more money, convinced myself that if I just achieved enough, it would fill the hole. But it doesn't. It just makes the hole more expensive. He took a breath. My son is 8 years old, and I don't know his favorite color. I don't know what he's afraid of. I don't know the names of his friends. I pay someone else to know those things because I've been too scared to face who I am without the work, without the success, without all the things that let me pretend I'm fine. Elena's expression softened slightly. Tonight, sitting in your living room, watching a movie with Sophie asleep on my shoulder, I felt like a person, not a CEO, not a net worth. Just a guy watching a Christmas movie. And I realized I don't know how to be that anymore. But I want to learn. He met her eyes. I want to learn how to be present, how to show up, how to be someone my son would want to fall asleep next to the way Sophie just did. That's not about us, Elena said, but her voice was gentler. That's about you and Ethan. I know, but maybe being around people who know how to be a family could help me remember how. They stood there in the cramped kitchen, the sounds of the movie drifting in from the living room, Maria's knitting needles clicking steadily. I'm scared, Elena admitted finally. Of letting you in and having you leave, of Sophie getting attached and being crushed, of starting to care and being reminded why I stopped trying. I'm scared too, Mason said, of screwing this up, of disappointing you, of being exactly the guy you think I am, the one who runs when things get hard. So where does that leave us? Maybe it leaves us at breakfast tomorrow, just breakfast, one step at a time. Elena studied him, chewing her lip. Just breakfast. Just breakfast. And you'll be honest? If this gets weird, or you want out, or it's not what you thought. I promise. She nodded slowly. Okay, breakfast, 9 o'clock, and if you don't show up, I'm throwing away your fancy scarf. Sophie's wearing that scarf. Then you'd better show up, because she's not giving it back. They returned to the living room. Sophie was still asleep, now sprawled across the couch in the boneless way only children could manage. The movie's credits were rolling. I should go, Mason said quietly. Let you all get some rest. Maria looked up from her knitting. You know how to get home from here? I'll figure it out. Elena will drive you. Our car is a piece of junk, but it runs. Mama, you don't have to. It's Christmas Eve, mija. We don't let people walk home in the snow, even rich people who probably have a driver on speed dial. Mason didn't argue. Elena grabbed her keys and her thin coat, and they headed down to the building's parking lot, where an ancient Honda sat covered in snow. Don't judge Betsy, Elena said, starting the engine after 3 tries. She's been loyal for 12 years. The car rattled and wheezed but moved forward. Elena drove carefully through the snow-covered streets, and Mason gave her directions to the Pearl District. As they pulled up to his building, all glass and steel and doormen in crisp uniforms, Elena let out a low whistle. So, she said, not a billionaire, huh? I said I worked in technology. You didn't mention you own the technology. She stared up at the building. This is where you live? Top floor. Jesus. She gripped the steering wheel. And you came to our apartment for dry turkey and secondhand decorations because it was real, Mason said simply. This place is beautiful and empty. Your place was cramped and full. I needed full. Elena nodded slowly, not looking at him. 9 o'clock, breakfast. If you change your mind, I won't. If you do, I'll understand. You'll wake up tomorrow in your palace in the sky and remember that we're not your world, Mason. We can't be. Maybe I need a different world. She finally looked at him, and in the glow of the streetlights, he could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Don't say things like that. Don't make me hope. Why not? Because hope hurts when it's wrong. Mason wanted to promise her she wouldn't be hurt, that he'd show up, that this wasn't just a moment of loneliness driving him toward the first warm thing he'd found, but promises were cheap, and she'd clearly heard too many of them. 9 o'clock, he said instead. I'll be there. He got out of the car and watched her drive away, the taillights of her ancient Honda disappearing into the snow. Then he turned and walked into his building, past the doorman who wished him Merry Christmas, up the private elevator to the penthouse that cost more than most people would make in a lifetime. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Perfect, cold, empty. He poured himself that scotch he'd been planning earlier and stood at the window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, in a cramped fourth-floor apartment, a little girl was sleeping in his scarf. A woman was probably lying awake worrying that he wouldn't show up. A grandmother was knitting and wondering if she'd been right to let a stranger into her home. And here he was, exactly where he'd been every night for 3 years. Alone, successful, miserable. His phone buzzed. Jennifer, the nanny. Ethan fell asleep waiting for you, said to tell you Merry Christmas. Mason closed his eyes against the wave of shame and regret. He texted back, I'll be home for breakfast. Tell him I promise. Another cheap promise. But maybe, if he could show up for Elena and Sophie tomorrow, he could remember how to show up for his own son. He finished the scotch and went to bed, and for the first time in years he set his alarm for Christmas morning, not because he had work to do, but because he had somewhere real to be. Mason woke at 6:30 to the sound of his own alarm, a noise he hadn't heard in months. Usually Jennifer knocked on his door whenever he needed to be somewhere. Usually he slept until 7:30 or 8, rolled into the office by 9:30, and started the endless cycle of meetings and emails and decisions that kept Reed Technologies running. But this morning was different. He lay in his king-size bed staring at the ceiling, the winter sun just beginning to paint the sky outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere across the city, Sophie was probably already awake, bouncing around that cramped apartment, excited about Christmas morning. Elena was probably making coffee in that tiny kitchen, trying not to wake her mother. Maria was probably already awake anyway, the way old people always seem to be. And here he was, a 40-minute drive away, second-guessing everything. What the hell was he doing? He had a son sleeping down the hall. He had a company to run. He had a life, expensive, successful, functional, that didn't include breakfast with strangers and a fourth-floor walk-up where the elevator barely worked. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. He could text Elena, make an excuse. She was expecting it anyway. She'd practically given him permission last night to bail. Everyone leaves. The way she'd said it, flat, certain, resigned, like it was a law of physics she'd learned to accept. Mason got out of bed. He showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, and walked down the hall to Ethan's room. The door was cracked open, and his son was still asleep, curled around a stuffed dinosaur that had seen better days. 8 years old. When had that happened? Mason remembered the hospital room where Rebecca had held their newborn son, both of them terrified and amazed. He remembered Ethan's first steps, first words, first everything. And then Rebecca got sick, and the memories got blurry, a haze of hospital visits and treatments that didn't work, and trying to keep the company running and failing at absolutely everything that mattered. After she died, the blur had gotten worse. Easier to work than to feel. Easier to hire people to handle Ethan than to face the fact that he had no idea how to be both parents at once. "Hey, buddy," Mason said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Ethan stirred, blinking sleepy eyes. "Dad?" "Merry Christmas." The boy sat up slowly, looking confused. "You're here." The statement landed like an accusation. "You're here." As if Mason being in his son's bedroom on Christmas morning was noteworthy, unusual, unexpected. "I know I haven't been around much," Mason started, then stopped. "How did you apologize to an 8-year-old for 3 years of absence?" "I'm sorry, Ethan. I've been a terrible dad." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "Jennifer said you had important work stuff." "Jennifer was being nice. The truth is, I've been hiding. From you, from everything. Because I didn't know how to do this without your mom, and instead of trying, I just didn't." His son stared at him with Rebecca's eyes, dark and intelligent and way too knowing for 8 years old. "Are you dying?" Ethan asked. "What? No, why would you?" "Because you're talking weird, like people on TV before they die, all serious and sorry about stuff." Mason felt something between a laugh and a sob catch in his throat. "I'm not dying. I'm just trying to be better, starting today." "Okay." Ethan didn't sound convinced. "Does that mean you're staying home?" "For breakfast, yeah, and then I have to go somewhere for a little while, but I want you to come with me, if you want." "Where?" "To meet some people. A little girl named Sophie and her mom and grandma. They invited us for Christmas breakfast." Ethan's face scrunched up. "Why?" "Because they're kind. And because yesterday I was feeling really alone and they invited me to dinner and it helped. And I thought maybe you'd like to meet them." "Are they rich like us?" The question was so casual, so matter-of-fact, as if Ethan had already learned to divide the world into categories, rich and not rich, important and unimportant, worth knowing and not worth knowing. "No," Mason said carefully. "They're not rich. They live in a small apartment and they don't have a lot of extra money. But they're good people. Real people. The kind of people I want you to know." Ethan considered this. "Will there be other kids?" "Just Sophie. She's 6. That's kind of young. She's smart, though, and funny. I think you'd like her." "Okay." Ethan shrugged, the way kids did when they didn't fully understand but were willing to go along with it. "Can I bring my Switch? Let's try breakfast without screens, just talking. Can you do that?" Another shrug. "I guess." They went downstairs together, something they hadn't done in months, and Mason actually made breakfast. Scrambled eggs that were slightly overdone and toast that was slightly underdone. But Ethan ate it without complaint, probably too shocked by his father's presence to criticize the cooking. Jennifer appeared around 7:30, looking startled to find them in the kitchen together. "Oh, I didn't realize you were—" "Should I—" "Take the day off," Mason said. "Paid. Go be with your family." "Are you sure?" "I usually handle Christmas breakfast and I'm sure." "Merry Christmas, Jennifer." She left, but not before giving Mason a look that suggested she thought he might be having some kind of breakdown. Maybe he was. Maybe breakdown was just another word for finally waking up. By 8:30, Mason and Ethan were in the car. Not the town car with the driver, but Mason's personal vehicle that he almost never drove himself. A BMW that cost more than Elena's apartment was worth, but at least he was driving it. "Where do these people live?" Ethan asked from the back seat, staring out the window as they left the Pearl District. "Different neighborhood. Not far." They drove through streets that grew progressively less polished, and Mason watched his son's face in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge his reaction. Ethan had grown up in penthouses and private schools, driven in town cars and vacation homes. This world, the one most people actually lived in, was foreign territory. It looks old here, Ethan said as they pulled up to Elena's building. It is old, but that doesn't mean it's bad. I didn't say it was bad. I just said it was old. Fair point. They climbed out of the car, and Mason led Ethan into the building. The lobby still smelled like cleaning products and old cooking. The elevator still wheezed ominously. Is this safe? Ethan whispered as they stepped inside. Probably. That's not a yes. It's been working for years. We'll be fine. The elevator lurched upward with its usual concerning noises, and Ethan gripped Mason's hand, something he hadn't done in at least a year. When they reached the 4th floor and the doors opened, his son didn't let go. Mason knocked on apartment 4C, his heart doing something stupid and nervous in his chest. What if Elena had changed her mind? What if she'd decided overnight that this was a terrible idea? What if... The door flew open and Sophie stood there in Christmas pajamas covered in reindeer, his cashmere scarf still wrapped around her neck. You came. She threw herself at Mason's legs with the full-body enthusiasm of a 6-year-old. Mama said you might not come, but I knew you would. I told her, I said, Mason's gonna come because he promised. And she said people break promises all the time, but I said not Mason, and I was right. Sophie, let the man breathe. Elena appeared behind her daughter, looking tired and beautiful and nervous. Her eyes went to Ethan, then back to Mason. You brought your son. I hope that's okay. Ethan, this is Elena and Sophie. Ladies, this is Ethan. Sophie released Mason and studied Ethan with undisguised curiosity. You're really tall for 8. How do you know I'm 8? Your dad told me. I'm 6. Do you like trampolines? I guess. Good. Me too. Do you have a trampoline? No. Me neither. We should both get trampolines and then jump on them together. Do you like pancakes? Ethan blinked, clearly overwhelmed. Yeah? Grandma's making pancakes. They're pretty good except sometimes they're lumpy, but if you put enough syrup on, you can't tell. Come on. She grabbed Ethan's hand and dragged him inside before he could protest. Mason and Elena were left standing in the doorway. Sorry, Mason said. I should have asked if it was okay to bring him. It's fine, more than fine. I wasn't expecting it. Elena stepped back to let him in. It's good that you brought him. Shows you're serious about whatever this is. What is this? I have no idea, but come in before the pancakes get cold. Mama made way too many because she always does. The apartment looked different in morning light. Smaller somehow, but also warmer. Sophie had clearly been up for hours. New drawings covered the coffee table and wrapping paper littered the floor around the small tree. A few modest presents sat underneath, nothing expensive, but wrapped with care. Maria emerged from the kitchen, spatula in hand. Well, you showed up. I owe Elena $5. You bet against me? I bet on probability. Most men don't show up when things get real. She studied Ethan with the same sharp assessment she'd given Mason last night. And you brought reinforcements. Smart. Harder for my girls to kick you out if there's a kid involved. Mama! Elena looked mortified. What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Maria pointed the spatula at Ethan. You like pancakes, boy? Ethan nodded, half hiding behind Mason. Good. Make yourself useful and set the table. Plates are in that cabinet. To Mason's surprise, Ethan obeyed without argument. Maybe there was something about Maria's tone that made disobedience seem impossible. Breakfast was chaos in the best way. Sophie talked nonstop, bouncing between topics like a pinball. Christmas presents, school, her friend's pet hamster, whether penguins could fly if they really tried. Ethan barely got a word in, but he didn't seem to mind. He watched Sophie the way someone might watch a fascinating science experiment. The pancakes were indeed lumpy. Maria's coffee was strong enough to strip paint. The orange juice was from concentrate. The syrup was store brand. Mason had eaten breakfast at the Four Seasons last month. This was better. So, Ethan, Maria said, pouring more coffee, your dad tells us he's been working too much. That true? Ethan glanced at Mason uncertainly. I guess. You guess or you know? I know. And how do you feel about that? Mama, you can't just interrogate the kid, Elena started. I can and I am. He's 8, not stupid. He's got opinions. Maria turned back to Ethan. Well? Ethan pushed pancake pieces around his plate. It's fine. Jennifer's nice. She helps me with homework and stuff. That's not what I asked. I asked how you feel about your dad working all the time. The table went quiet. Sophie had finally stopped talking, watching Ethan with wide eyes. Mason wanted to intervene to save his son from this uncomfortable conversation, but something stopped him. I don't know, Ethan said finally, his voice small. Sometimes I wish he was home more, but he has important stuff to do. Jennifer says he's making the world better with his company. Jennifer sounds like she's reading from a press release, Maria muttered. What do you say? Ethan looked at Mason, and there was something raw in his expression, something Mason had been too busy to see before. I say I miss him. Even when he's home, he's not really home. He's on his phone or his computer, and even when he promises to do stuff, he usually doesn't because something comes up. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. I know it's not his fault. I know he's busy, but sometimes I just want him to pick me up from school or come to my soccer games or remember what grade I'm in without asking Jennifer. The words hit Mason like physical blows, each one true, each one deserved. Third grade, Mason said quietly. You're in third grade. Your teacher is Mrs. Patterson. You hate math, but you're good at it. You like soccer, but you wish the coach would let you play forward more. Your favorite color is blue. Your best friend is Marcus. You're allergic to strawberries, and you still sleep with that dinosaur Mom bought you when you were 4. Ethan stared at him. You know all that? I pay attention. I've just been paying attention from too far away. Mason set down his fork. That's going to change, starting now. You said that before. I know, and I screwed it up, but I'm going to keep trying until I get it right. Sophie had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now she piped up. That's what Mama says about making brownies. She keeps messing them up, but she keeps trying anyway. I don't mess them up, Elena protested. They're just experimental. They're burned, Mama. Experimental and burned can coexist. The tension broke. Ethan even smiled a little. After breakfast, Sophie insisted on showing Ethan her room, a space roughly the size of Mason's walk-in closet, but decorated with obvious care. Handmade posters on the walls, a shelf of well-loved books, a collection of rocks she'd apparently been gathering for months. She's a lot, Elena said, watching them go. Sophie, I mean. If she's too much, just tell her. She's fine, Ethan called back. I like rocks too. Maria snorted. Well, would you look at that? Common ground. Mason helped Elena clear the table, and they ended up in the kitchen again, becoming a pattern, apparently. The space was so small their elbows kept bumping. He's a good kid, Elena said, scraping plates. Quiet, watchful. He's lonely. The admission hurt. I've made him lonely. You're here now. That counts for something. Does it? Or am I just another adult who's going to disappoint him? Elena was quiet for a moment, washing a dish with more attention than it needed. Last night, after you left, Sophie asked me if you were going to be her new dad. Mason's hands stilled. What did you tell her? I told her life doesn't work like that you were just a nice man who needed some company, and we were happy to provide it, but you had your own life to get back to. She rinsed the dish, set it in the rack. She cried. Not a lot, just a little. Said it wasn't fair that everyone always left. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't make promises you can't keep. Not to her. She's already decided you're important, and when 6-year-olds decide that, they mean it forever. What about you? Mason asked. Have you decided I'm important? Elena's hands went still in the soapy water. I've decided you're dangerous. Dangerous? To my carefully maintained walls. To the story I tell myself about how the world works. To every defense mechanism I've built since Sophie's dad walked out. She pulled the plug, watched the water drain. You show up in your expensive clothes with your sad eyes and your honest answers, and you're kind to my daughter, and you actually show up when you say you will, and I don't know what to do with that. You could let me keep showing up. And then what? You're a billionaire, Mason. I'm a waitress. You live in a penthouse. I live in a 400-square-foot apartment where the toilet runs and the heat barely works. This doesn't make sense. Maybe it doesn't have to make sense. Everything has to make sense when you have a kid depending on you. Elena dried her hands, turned to face him. I can't afford to make mistakes. I can't afford to let someone into our lives who's going to leave when things get hard or boring or real. Sophie's already lost too much. So have you. This isn't about me, isn't it? Mason leaned against the counter, studying her. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because Sophie needed it, or your mom expected it, or the bills required it. Elena opened her mouth, closed it. Exactly, Mason said. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long, you've forgotten you're allowed to want things too. That's not... I can't just... She stopped, frustrated. You don't understand. When you're poor, wanting things is dangerous. It's how you end up disappointed or in debt or both. I've learned to want less. It's safer. It's also lonelier. Before Elena could respond, Sophie's voice echoed from the other room. Mama, Ethan says they have a pool at his building. Can we go swimming? It's December, baby. Indoor pool, it's okay. Ethan says so. Elena sighed. I should... Go. Mason stepped back, giving her space. But think about what I said. About wanting things. About letting someone show up for you the way you show up for everyone else. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she left the kitchen, and Mason was alone with the dish rack and the lingering smell of burnt pancakes, and the growing certainty that he was in way over his head. In the living room, Sophie was literally bouncing. Ethan says their pool has a hot tub and a sauna. Can we go? Please, 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 please. Sophie, we can't just invite ourselves. I'm inviting you, Ethan said quietly. It was the first time he'd really spoken up all morning. If you want. The pool's usually empty on Christmas, and there's a game room, and I don't know, it might be fun. He looked at Mason as he said it, and there was something hopeful in his expression. Something that said, maybe he wanted this too. These loud, warm people in their small apartment who actually seemed to like each other. If it's okay with your mom, Mason said to Sophie. 4 sets of eyes turned to Elena. She looked trapped, uncomfortable, like she was being pushed towards something she'd specifically been trying to avoid. We don't have swimsuits here, and we have extras, Ethan said. Jennifer keeps a bunch of stuff for guests, different sizes and everything. See? Sophie grabbed Elena's hand. We have suits. We can go swimming on Christmas. This is the best day ever. Maria had been watching from her armchair, her knitting needles clicking away. Go, she said finally. I'll hold down the fort here. You all go splash around in the rich people's pool. Mama? Elena. Maria set down her knitting. When's the last time you went swimming? When's the last time you did anything fun that didn't involve working or worrying? I can't just... You can. You're choosing not to. There's a difference. Maria's expression softened. Go. Let Sophie be a kid. Let yourself be young. I'll be here when you get back, and the world won't end because you took an afternoon off from being responsible. Elena looked like she wanted to argue, but Sophie was already pulling on her coat, and Ethan was listing all the amenities at Mason's building with the enthusiasm of a real estate agent, and Maria had gone back to her knitting like the decision was already made. Fine, Elena said finally, but just swimming, and we're not staying long, Sophie cheered. Ethan actually smiled, a real smile, the first Mason had seen in months. 20 minutes later, they were in Mason's car heading back to the Pearl District. Sophie provided running commentary from the back seat, asking approximately 400 questions about the car, the building, whether they had a basketball court, if the hot tub had jets, did they allow diving, were there water slides? No water slides, Mason said. Sorry. That's okay. Hot tubs are better anyway. Right, Ethan? Ethan nodded. The hot tub's pretty cool, and there's a steam room too. What's a steam room? It's like a room full of steam. It's hot and foggy. Sophie's eyes went wide. Like a cloud you can sit in? Kind of, yeah. This is the best Christmas ever. Elena sat in the passenger seat, quiet and tense, watching the city slide past. Mason wanted to tell her it would be okay, that she could relax, that this didn't have to mean anything she wasn't ready for it to mean. But he kept quiet, letting the kids' chatter fill the space. When they pulled into his building's parking garage, Sophie gasped. This is like the Batcave. It's just parking, Mason said, but he was smiling. The doorman greeted them with professional warmth, and if he was surprised to see Mason with a woman and 2 kids instead of his usual solo arrivals, he didn't show it. They took the elevator, the one that actually worked, with mirrors and soft music, up to the penthouse. When the doors opened directly into Mason's apartment, Sophie's jaw dropped. You live here? All of this is yours? The penthouse looked exactly as Mason had left it that morning, pristine, expensive, empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city sprawled below, modern furniture in shades of gray and white, art on the walls that cost more than cars. Everything carefully designed to look effortlessly sophisticated. It felt sterile after the warmth of Elena's apartment. "It's big," Ethan said to Sophie, "but it's kind of boring." Sophie walked slowly through the space, taking it all in. "Where are all your pictures? Like, of people?" I don't really have many out. Most of Rebecca's photos were packed away because looking at them hurt. Most of Ethan's school pictures were still in the envelopes they'd come in because Mason kept meaning to frame them and never did. "That's sad," Sophie pronounced. "Houses should have pictures. How else do you remember the good stuff?" "Out of the mouths of babes." "Swimsuits are in the guest room," Mason said, changing the subject. "Jennifer keeps them in the closet there. Elena, you can use the master bathroom to change if you want privacy." Elena nodded, looking overwhelmed. Mason led her to the master suite, a space roughly the size of her entire apartment, and pulled out a selection of swimsuits Jennifer had stocked for visiting executives and their families. "These should fit," he said, laying them on the bed. "Take your time. The pool's on the roof. I'll get the kids changed." "Mason," Elena's voice stopped him at the door. "This is insane. Your home is... I knew you had money, but this is too much?" "Yes, and also beautiful, and also terrifying because I don't belong here, and Sophie's going to get ideas, and..." "You belong anywhere you want to be," Mason interrupted gently. "The penthouse doesn't make me better than you. It just makes me lonelier in a nicer space." He left before she could argue, and went to help Ethan find swimsuits that would fit Sophie. By the time Elena emerged from the master bedroom, wrapped in a towel and looking self-conscious, the kids were already changed and ready. They took the elevator to the roof, where the pool area sat under a retractable glass ceiling. It was heated, pristine, and completely empty, just like Ethan had promised. Sophie cannonballed into the pool immediately, not even testing the temperature first. Ethan followed with more caution, and soon they were splashing each other and laughing, and Mason realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his son laugh like that. Elena set down her towel, hesitating at the pool's edge in a simple one-piece that was probably meant for lap swimming, but somehow made Mason forget how to form words. "It's heated," he managed. "Should be comfortable." She slipped into the water, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained walls dropped. She smiled. Really smiled, not the tight, worried expression she usually wore. "This is ridiculous," she said, but she was still smiling. "We're swimming on Christmas Day in a rooftop pool in a penthouse. This doesn't happen to people like me." "Maybe it should." Sophie swam over, water streaming down her face. "Mama, did you see how deep it is? And Ethan says there's a diving board, but we have to ask first before we use it." "No diving board today," Elena said. "We're guests. We're being careful." "But, Sophie..." The girl pouted but swam away, already finding something else to be excited about. Ethan showed her the underwater lights, and they started a game that involved holding their breath and making faces at each other below the surface. Mason floated near Elena, giving her space, but not too much. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this. For including us. Sophie's going to talk about this for months." "Good." "It's not good. It's going to make our regular life seem even smaller. Or maybe it'll show her that good things can happen, that people can be kind without wanting something in return." "Everyone wants something in return," Elena said, but there was less certainty in her voice than before. They floated there while the kids played, the winter sun filtering through the glass ceiling, the city sprawling below them like a promise or a warning. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said eventually. "That depends on what it is." "Sophie's dad. What happened there?" Elena's expression closed off slightly, but she didn't swim away. "The usual story. We were young, stupid, thought we were in love. I got pregnant. He stuck around long enough to make promises he had no intention of keeping, then disappeared when Sophie was 2. Last I heard, he was in Nevada, or maybe Colorado. He doesn't keep in touch." "Does Sophie remember him?" "Barely, which is probably a blessing. He wasn't cruel or anything, just absent. Even when he was there, he wasn't really there. Know the feeling?" The barb hit home. Mason nodded. Yeah, I do. I've tried to give her enough, to be enough. But there are things I can't be. I can't be a dad, can't give her siblings or a big house or family vacations, can't afford gymnastics lessons or summer camp or any of the stuff other kids have. Elena's voice cracked slightly. Some days I feel like I'm failing her just by being all she's got. You're not failing her. She's happy. She's kind. She's curious and brave and full of joy. That's all you. That's spite. I'm raising her out of pure spite for everyone who said I couldn't do it alone. Mason laughed. Couldn't help it. That's fair. Spite's underrated as a motivator. They watched the kids race from one end of the pool to the other, Sophie shrieking with laughter, even though Ethan was clearly letting her win. He's good with her, Elena observed. Your son. He's patient. He's lonely too. Maybe they're good for each other. Maybe. Elena turned to look at Mason directly. Can I ask you something now? Fair's fair. What do you want from this? From us? And don't tell me nothing, because nobody gives up their Christmas morning to eat lumpy pancakes with strangers for no reason. Mason thought about lying, about deflecting, about giving her an answer that would be safe and simple and wouldn't expose the raw, desperate truth underneath. But Elena deserved better than that. I want to remember how to be human, he said quietly. I want to figure out how to be present instead of absent. I want my son to look at me the way Sophie looks at you, like I'm someone worth believing in. I want to feel something other than empty or exhausted or like I'm slowly disappearing inside my own life. He paused, making sure he met her eyes. And yeah, I want to keep seeing you, keep knowing you, because in the 12 hours since I met you, I've felt more real than I have in 3 years. Because you look at me like I'm just a man, not a net worth. Because Sophie decided I was worth saving, and I want to prove her right. Elena's expression was unreadable. That's a lot to put on people you barely know. I know. I'm sorry. You asked for honesty. I did. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't have any of that figured out. How to be human or present or any of it. I'm just surviving day to day. Working double shifts, dodging bills, trying to make Sophie believe the world is good, even though most evidence suggests otherwise. You're doing better than me. I'm doing different than you, not better, just different. She pushed wet hair out of her face. I can't fix you, Mason. I don't have the energy or the resources or the knowledge. I can barely fix myself most days. I'm not asking you to fix me. Then what are you asking? To keep showing up, that's all. Just let me keep showing up. Before Elena could answer, Sophie called from across the pool. Can we try the hot tub now, please? Ethan says it has bubble jets. Elena looked at Mason, something shifting in her expression. A decision being made, a wall being lowered just slightly. Okay, she called back to Sophie, then quieter to Mason. Okay? It wasn't much, but it was enough. They spent the next hour in the hot tub, the kids fascinated by the jets. Mason and Elena sitting close enough that their shoulders touched occasionally. They talked about nothing important, favorite foods, bad movies, embarrassing childhood stories, the kind of stuff that filled space between people trying to figure out if they fit. Eventually, Sophie started yawning, and Ethan was getting pruny, and Elena declared it was time to head back before Maria sent out a search party. They changed back into their clothes, and Mason ordered pizza to be delivered to Elena's apartment, enough for dinner and leftovers, ignoring her protests about not needing charity. It's not charity, he said. It's pizza. There's a difference. On the drive back, Sophie fell asleep against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted from swimming and excitement. Ethan looked out the window, quieter than usual, and Mason wondered what he was thinking. When they pulled up to Elena's building, Sophie woke up long enough to hug Mason goodbye with surprising ferocity. You're coming back, right? She mumbled sleepily. Tomorrow? Not tomorrow, Elena said gently. Mason has his own... How about this weekend? Mason heard himself say. Saturday. I could take you to lunch, all of you, if you want. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Mason looked at Elena, whose expression was torn between hope and terror. If your mom says it's okay. Please, Mama, please. Elena sighed, but she was almost smiling. Saturday, lunch, but somewhere normal, not anywhere fancy. Deal. Mason grinned. I know a great diner that does terrible coffee and amazing pie. Perfect. They said their goodbyes, and Mason watched Elena carry a half-asleep Sophie into the building, Maria's silhouette visible in the fourth-floor window. Back in the car, Ethan was quiet until they were halfway home. Dad? Yeah, buddy. Are you going to date Sophie's mom? Mason hadn't expected the question. I don't know, maybe. Would that bother you? Ethan thought about it. I like them. They're nice, different from your work people. They are different. Sophie talks a lot. She does. But it's not annoying. It's kind of, I don't know, it makes things less quiet. Mason glanced in the rearview mirror, saw his son looking smaller than 8 years old, more vulnerable than he should be. Our house is too quiet, isn't it? Mason said. Ethan nodded. Even when Jennifer's there, it's still quiet. Like nobody really lives there. Like we're just staying there until something better happens. The observation gutted him. That's going to change, Mason said. I promise. You keep saying that. I know, but this time I mean it. That's what you said last time. Fair point. Mason didn't have a good answer for that. So instead he did something he hadn't done in years. You're right, he said. I have said that before. And I didn't follow through. And I'm sorry. I can't promise I'll be perfect at this. I'll probably mess up. But I'm going to try, really try. And if I start slipping back into old patterns, I need you to call me out. Can you do that? Ethan looked surprised. Really? Really, we're a team. That means we both get to hold each other accountable. Okay. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Can we really see them again on Saturday? If you want to, I want to. Sophie said she'd show me her rock collection. She has one that's shaped like a turtle. Mason smiled. Then we'll definitely go Saturday. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. The first comfortable silence they'd shared in longer than Mason could remember. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Mason sat in his living room with the lights off, looking out at the city. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sophie wanted me to send you a picture of her wearing your scarf to bed. She says it smells like coffee and something expensive. Also, thank you for today, for being kind, for showing up. Elena. The attached photo showed Sophie curled up in bed, the cashmere scarf wrapped around her like a blanket, grinning at the camera. Mason typed back, "Thank you for letting me. See you Saturday?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Saturday. But Mason? Don't break her heart, or I will end you. Fair enough. I'll do my best. Your best better be really good. It will be, I promise. He sent the text and stared at it for a long time, knowing that this promise mattered more than any contract he'd ever signed, any deal he'd ever closed, any success he'd ever achieved. This promise was to a 6-year-old girl who'd decided he was worth saving, to a woman who'd been disappointed too many times but was willing to risk it one more time, to his own son, who deserved a father who actually showed up. Mason set down the phone and, for the first time in 3 years, didn't pour himself that nightly scotch. Didn't need it. He had something better to look forward to. Saturday was 4 days away. He just had to not screw it up before then. Saturday didn't come easy. Mason made it through Wednesday by restructuring 3 meetings and delegating 2 projects he'd normally micromanage himself. His executive team looked at him like he'd grown a second head when he announced he was leaving the office at 4:30 instead of his usual 8 or 9. "Are you feeling okay?" his CFO asked, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm fine, I just have somewhere to be." "Where?" "Home. With my son." The silence that followed was awkward enough to be painful. His team literally didn't know how to respond to the concept of him prioritizing family over quarterly projections. Thursday brought its own challenges. Ethan's school called because he'd gotten into a fight during recess, something about another kid making fun of his poor girlfriend, after Ethan had apparently spent all of lunch talking about Sophie. Mason left a board meeting to pick him up from the principal's office, and the look on Ethan's face when his father walked through the door, instead of Jennifer, was worth every disapproving glance from the board members. "You came," Ethan said, voice small. "Of course I came. You're my son." In the car, Ethan was quiet until they were almost home. "I didn't mean to hit him." "What did he say?" "He said Sophie was probably lying about having a mom who worked at a diner. He said people who live in apartments like that are probably on welfare or something. He said I was stupid for being friends with poor people. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And what did you say? I told him to shut up, and he laughed. So I pushed him, and then he pushed back, and then I punched him. Ethan slumped in his seat. I'm sorry. I know fighting's wrong, but he was being mean about Sophie. You're not in trouble with me, Mason said carefully. I mean, violence isn't the answer, and we'll talk about better ways to handle this. But defending your friend? I'm not mad about that. Really? Really? Though next time, maybe try words first. I did try words. He didn't listen. Fair point. Mason made a mental note to teach his son some better verbal comebacks, and possibly to have a word with that kid's parents about raising a judgmental little jerk. They spent Thursday evening actually together, ordered Chinese food, watched a movie, talked about nothing important. Ethan fell asleep on the couch, and Mason carried him to bed, something he hadn't done since the boy was 5. Friday crawled by. Mason caught himself checking his phone constantly, wondering if Elena would cancel, if she'd had second thoughts, if reality had set in and she'd realized this whole thing was insane. But no cancellation text came. Instead, around 7 that evening, his phone buzzed with a message from Elena. Sophie wants to know if Ethan likes chicken nuggets or if that's baby food for 8-year-olds. She's very concerned about seeming cool. Mason smiled. Tell her Ethan loves chicken nuggets and that she's already cool. She also wants to know if you're going to wear a suit to the diner because she thinks you shouldn't because diners are casual places and you might scare the waitresses. No suit, I promise. Good. See you tomorrow. 11:30. Lou's Diner on Morrison. Don't be late or Sophie will assume you died in a car accident. Dramatic. You haven't seen dramatic. She once cried for an hour because she thought a stuffed animal was lonely. That's actually kind of sweet. It was my last nerve on a Tuesday, but sure, sweet. Mason went to bed that night feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Not for a deal or a product launch or a quarterly earnings call. Just for tomorrow. For seeing people who made him feel like more than a walking bank account. Saturday morning arrived with winter sunshine and Ethan bouncing into his room at 7. Is it time yet? It's 7 in the morning. We don't leave for 4 hours. But what if there's traffic? Then we'll leave early. Go back to sleep. Ethan didn't go back to sleep. Instead, he spent the next 4 hours trying on different outfits, asking if his hair looked okay, wondering if he should bring Sophie a present. It's lunch, not a wedding, Mason said, amused. I know, but what if she thinks I don't care? Trust me, she won't think that. She knows you care. At 11, they climbed into the car, Mason in jeans and a sweater, Ethan in his favorite shirt with a dinosaur on it. They arrived at Lou's Diner at exactly 11:28, and Mason could see Elena and Sophie already sitting in a booth by the window. Sophie spotted them first and waved so enthusiastically she nearly knocked over a water glass. Elena caught it just in time, shooting her daughter an exasperated look that was mostly fondness. You're early, Elena said as they slid into the booth. I'm impressed. Sophie said you'd assume we died if we were late. She's not wrong. I have catastrophic thinking tendencies. Elena handed them menus that had definitely seen better decades. Welcome to Lou's. The coffee is terrible, the pancakes are good, and the pie is the only reason this place stays in business. Sounds perfect. Sophie was staring at Ethan like he'd descended from heaven. You came. You thought I wouldn't? Mama said you might decide you had better things to do. Sophie, Elena's cheeks colored. What? You did say that. This morning. You said that, don't get your hopes up because people cancel sometimes. And I said, not Ethan. And you said, we'll see. But I was right. Ethan grinned. I wanted to come. I even brought you something. He pulled out a small rock from his pocket. Nothing special, just a smooth gray stone he'd found in their building's landscaping. But he'd clearly spent time picking it out. Sophie's eyes went wide like he'd handed her a diamond. It's so smooth. And it's got little sparkles if you turn it. This is going in my collection in the special spot. There's a special spot? The top shelf, where I keep the best ones. You can see it later if you want. Mama said we could go back to our place after lunch if you wanted to hang out. Elena looked surprised. I said maybe, if Mason and Ethan wanted to. I didn't promise. We want to, Mason said, meeting her eyes. If that's okay. It's more than okay. Elena said quietly, then louder. But first, food. I'm starving, and Sophie will eat her weight in pancakes if we let her. They ordered. Pancakes for Sophie, a burger for Ethan, breakfast specials for the adults. The waitress was a woman in her 50s who clearly knew Elena well. "This the new boyfriend?" she asked, with a grin that suggested she was absolutely going to gossip about this later. We're not, Elena stammered. "We're friends," Mason supplied. "I'm Mason. This is my son, Ethan." "Friends, huh?" The waitress winked. "That's what they all say. I'll get those orders in." After she left, Elena dropped her head into her hands. "I'm sorry. She means well, but she has no filter." "It's fine. Better than the stiff politeness I usually get." "People are polite to you?" "Aggressively polite. The kind that comes with a side of fear and resentment. Sounds exhausting." "It is." The food arrived quickly, and they fell into easy conversation. Sophie dominated most of it, telling increasingly elaborate stories about school and her friends, and a substitute teacher who apparently had weird hair and smelled like old books. Ethan mostly listened, occasionally adding his own observations, clearly fascinated by Sophie's ability to turn mundane events into epic narratives. Elena watched them with a soft expression, and Mason watched her, thinking about how different she looked when she wasn't worried about bills or rent, or whether she was failing at everything. "You're staring," she said without looking at him. "You look happy." "I look tired. I worked a double yesterday." "You can be both." She finally met his eyes. "I am both. Most days, anyway." "You work too hard," says the billionaire who probably sleeps 4 hours a night. "I'm trying to change that." "How's that going?" "Better since I met you." Elena looked away, but not before he saw the flush creep up her neck. "You can't just say stuff like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to believe you, and I can't afford to believe people too easily." Before Mason could respond, Sophie announced she was done eating and wanted to show Ethan the jukebox in the corner that still played actual records. The kids scrambled out of the booth, and suddenly Mason and Elena were alone. Or as alone as you could be in a crowded diner with mediocre acoustics. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, pushing pancake pieces around her plate. "Always. What do you actually want from this? And I'm not asking because I think you have bad intentions. I'm asking because I genuinely don't understand. You're rich. You're successful. You could date anyone. And you're choosing to spend your Saturday at a rundown diner with a broke waitress and her overexcited kid. It doesn't make sense." Mason thought about how to answer, how to make her understand without sounding like he was romanticizing her poverty or fetishizing her struggle. "When Rebecca died," he said slowly, "I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. Quarterly goals, product launches, board meetings, they all had clear metrics. Win or lose, succeed or fail. Everything in my life became about achievement because grief doesn't have a metric. You can't optimize your way out of missing someone." He paused, watching the kids feed quarters into the jukebox. "I built this empire, and somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was building it. I forgot that the point of having money is supposed to be the freedom to actually live, to be with people you care about, to do things that matter. And I looked around one day and realized I was the richest, loneliest person I knew." Elena was quiet, listening. "Then I met you and Sophie," Mason continued, "and you invited me into your home, fed me dry turkey, let me be part of your family for an evening. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than empty. You looked at me like I was just a person. Sophie looked at me like I was worth saving. And I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than a net worth or a title." He met Elena's eyes directly. "So what do I want? I want to keep feeling like a person. I want Ethan to see what an actual family looks like. I want to remember that life exists outside of conference rooms and quarterly earnings. And yeah, I want to keep seeing you, because you're real in a way nothing in my life has been for years." Elena blinked rapidly, clearly fighting tears. "That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you barely know." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for being honest." She wiped her eyes quickly. "It's just, I'm not some magical poverty fairy who's going to fix your life with homemade cookies and folksy wisdom. I'm a mess, Mason. I'm drowning in debt. I cry in the bathroom so Sophie doesn't see. I steal toilet paper from work sometimes because I can't afford to buy the good kind. I'm not aspirational or inspiring. I'm just tired. And you're still here, still showing up for Sophie, still finding reasons to smile, still inviting sad billionaires to Christmas dinner. Mason reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. That's not nothing, Elena. It feels like nothing most days. Then maybe we can both remind each other that we're something, even when it doesn't feel like it. She looked at his hand hovering near hers, then slowly closed the distance. Her fingers were cold from the iced water, calloused from years of waitressing. They were the realest thing he'd touched in years. This is scary, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. How to trust that you won't leave when you realize how complicated and messy my life actually is. I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that. Neither of us knows that. Then let's find out together. Before Elena could respond, the jukebox started playing an old country song, and Sophie came running back to the booth. Mama, they have that song Grandma likes, the one about the broken heart and the truck. Elena laughed, the tension breaking. That describes about 90% of country songs, baby. Well, this one's good. Come listen. Sophie grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the jukebox. Ethan followed, trying to explain to Sophie how records actually worked, which she found fascinating. Mason paid the check, leaving a tip that would probably make that waitress's entire week, and they headed back to Elena's apartment. The building looked even shabbier in daylight, but Mason barely noticed. He was too busy watching Elena and Sophie walk ahead of him, hand in hand, Sophie talking a mile a minute about something that had happened at school. Ethan fell into step beside Mason. I like them, he said quietly. Me too, buddy. Are you going to marry Sophie's mom? Mason nearly tripped. What? Marcus at school says when adults go on lunch dates, it means they're going to get married. Are you? It's more complicated than that. Do you want to? I barely know her. But if you did know her, would you want to? Mason looked at Elena, the way she bent down to hear something Sophie was whispering, the way her whole face lit up when she laughed at whatever her daughter had said, the way she existed in the world with such fierce determination despite everything trying to grind her down. Yeah, he said honestly. I think maybe I would. Okay. Ethan nodded like this was a perfectly reasonable answer. Sophie says her mom needs someone to fix the sink and help carry groceries, so if you marry her, you should probably learn to do that stuff. Noted. Back at the apartment, Maria was watching a cooking show and knitting something that might have been a scarf or possibly a small blanket. You're back early, she observed. Thought you'd be gone all day. Lunch was quick, Elena said, and Sophie wanted to show Ethan her rock collection. Ah, the famous rock collection. She's been reorganizing it all morning in preparation. Sophie beamed. Come on, Ethan, I'll show you the special shelf. The kids disappeared into Sophie's room and Maria jerked her head toward the kitchen. Elena, help me with the dishes. Mason, you're in charge of the living room. Don't break anything. It was clearly a setup to get Elena alone, but Elena went anyway, shooting Mason an apologetic look. Mason sat on the worn couch pretending to watch the cooking show while absolutely eavesdropping on the conversation happening in the kitchen. So, Maria's voice carried clearly, you going to tell me what's happening here or do I have to guess? Nothing's happening. Elena's voice was defensive. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him like you're terrified and hopeful in equal measure. That's not nothing. It's complicated. It always is. Question is, are you going to let complicated stop you from maybe being happy? I'm happy now. You're surviving now. There's a difference. There was silence for a moment. Mason heard water running, dishes clinking. I'm scared, Mama, Elena said quietly. He's so far outside our world. And I like him. I really like him. And I think maybe he likes me too. But what if he's just lonely and we're convenient? What if he wakes up in a month and remembers he's a billionaire and we're just the poor family he helped out once? Then you'll survive. Same as you always do. But Sophie won't. She's already attached. She talks about Mason and Ethan like they're permanent, like they're family. And when he leaves, if he leaves, you're so busy expecting the worst that you're not even giving the best a chance to happen. The best doesn't happen to people like us. Says who? You? The universe? Some rule book I've never seen? Maria's voice softened. Mija, I know you've been hurt. I know Sophie's father did a number on you, but you can't spend the rest of your life waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they actually stay. More silence. Then Elena, barely audible. What if I'm not enough? What if he realizes I can't keep up with his world? That I don't know which fork to use at fancy restaurants or how to talk to rich people or… Stop. You're enough exactly as you are. If he can't see that, he's an idiot. But I don't think he's an idiot. I think he's a lonely man who found something real in you and Sophie, and he's smart enough to know that's rare. In the living room, Mason felt like he was intruding on something private, but he couldn't exactly announce he'd heard everything without making it worse. Fortunately, Sophie saved him by emerging from her room with Ethan in tow. Mason, you have to see this rock. It's shaped exactly like a heart. Ethan found it in our apartment building's parking lot last week. Mason let himself be dragged to Sophie's room, grateful for the interruption. The room was tiny but carefully organized. The rock collection took up an entire shelf, each stone labeled with masking tape noting where and when it had been found. This is impressive, Mason said, genuinely meaning it. Sophie's been collecting since she was 4, like Ethan supplied. She has 63 rocks now. She wants to get to 100 by the time she's 7. That's very specific. I like goals, Sophie said seriously. Grandma says goals are important. What are your goals? The question caught him off guard. My goals? Yeah, like, what do you want to happen? Ethan says you run a big company. What do you want the company to do? How did you explain corporate strategy to a 6-year-old? I want to make things safer, Mason said slowly. My company builds software that protects information, keeps bad people from stealing important stuff. Like a superhero? More like a really complicated lock. That's cool. But what do you want for you? Not your company. You. Mason looked at this tiny girl with her collection of rocks and her 2 big questions and her absolute certainty that the world owed her honest answers. I want to be a better dad, he said. I want Ethan to know I love him. I want to stop working so much. And I want to figure out how to be happy instead of just successful. Sophie nodded like this made perfect sense. Those are good goals. Better than rocks, probably. But rocks are still pretty great. Agreed. They spent the next hour in that cramped apartment, Mason and Ethan learning about rock classifications from Sophie's enthusiastic lecture, Elena and Maria joining them eventually, everyone squeezed into the small space that somehow held all of them. Around 4, Maria announced she had bridge club with some friends and headed out, leaving the 2 adults and 2 kids in the living room. We should probably go, Mason said, though he didn't particularly want to. Let you have your evening. You don't have to, Elena said. Unless you want to. I mean, it's Saturday. I'm not working tonight. We're just going to watch a movie and order pizza, probably. You're welcome to stay, if you want. She was nervous, Mason realized. Actually nervous about him staying. Like his presence mattered enough to make her anxious. We'd like to stay, he said. If that's really okay. It's okay. They ordered pizza, the cheap kind from the place down the street, not the artisan stuff Mason usually had delivered. The kids picked an animated movie that Ethan claimed he was too old for, but then got completely absorbed in anyway. Halfway through, Sophie fell asleep against Ethan's shoulder again, apparently a habit of hers. Ethan didn't seem to mind. He just adjusted slightly to make her more comfortable and kept watching the movie. Mason and Elena sat on the other end of the couch, close but not quite touching. The apartment was warm, almost too warm. The building's heat worked in extremes, and Elena had changed into sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked beautiful. This is nice, Mason said quietly. This is chaos. There's pizza grease on the coffee table, Sophie's drooling on Ethan's shirt, and I'm pretty sure the toilet's running again. Still nice. Elena smiled despite herself. You're weird. I'm starting to think that's a compliment. It is, sort of. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the movie playing, the kids absorbed in it. Outside, the winter evening settled over the city, and Mason thought about how 6 days ago he'd been sitting in a cafe planning to disappear from his own life. And now he was here, in a cramped apartment that smelled like cheap pizza and someone's vanilla candle, watching a kids' movie he'd never heard of, feeling more at home than he had in his $15 million penthouse in years. Mason? Elena's voice was quiet. Yeah? Earlier, at the diner, when you said you wanted to keep seeing me. She paused, choosing words carefully. Did you mean that? Or were you just being nice? I meant it. Why? Why do you think? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Mason turned to look at her properly. Because you make me want to be better. Because your daughter decided I was worth saving, and I want to prove her right. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be a person instead of a corporation. Because you're kind even when you're exhausted, and you're honest even when it's hard. And you've built this whole life out of basically nothing, and you're still here fighting. He paused. And because I like you, Elena. A lot. More than I probably should after knowing you less than a week. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's terrifying. I know. I'm going to mess this up. I don't know how to date. I don't know how to be with someone who has money. I don't know how to... Neither do I. I haven't dated since Rebecca. I don't remember how any of this works. So maybe we figure it out together. Maybe we both mess it up and forgive each other and try again. What if I can't keep up with your world? What if you don't have to? What if I'd rather be in yours? Elena laughed, a sound caught between hope and disbelief. My world involves broken elevators and past due bills and dinner from the dollar menu. And it also involves people who actually care about each other, who show up, who make room for strangers at their table. Mason reached for her hand again, and this time she let him take it. I'd rather have that than another year of catered meals I eat alone. You're romanticizing poverty. I'm romanticizing you. There's a difference. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, and they sat there holding hands on her worn-out couch, while their kids slept and the movie played and the city hummed outside the window. Okay, Elena said finally. Okay? Okay, let's try. Let's figure this out, but slowly. And if it gets weird or wrong, or if you wake up and realize this was a mistake, it won't be a mistake. You don't know that. Neither do you, so let's find out. Elena nodded, and they sat there in the almost dark, the TV providing the only light, their hands still linked. On the other end of the couch, Ethan caught Mason's eye and gave him a small thumbs up before returning his attention to the movie. Mason bit back a smile. The movie ended. Sophie woke up confused and cranky, asking where she was and why it was dark. Elena carried her to bed, and Mason heard her singing something soft and off-key until Sophie's questions faded into sleep. When Elena returned, Ethan was yawning. We should go, Mason said reluctantly. School tomorrow. Yeah, and I've got the early shift at the diner. They gathered their things slowly, neither quite ready for the evening to end. At the door, Sophie appeared in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. You're leaving? Just for tonight, Mason said. But I'll see you soon, promise. When? Mason looked at Elena. When's good for you? I'm off Wednesday evening, if you want to do something. Maybe all of us. Wednesday's perfect. Sophie considered this. Okay, but you have to pinky promise. She held out her tiny pinky, and Mason hooked his through it solemnly. I promise. Good. Because breaking a pinky promise is like the worst thing you can do. Worse than lying or stealing or eating all the cookies without sharing. Those are serious crimes. Very serious. Mason hugged her goodbye, and she squeezed his neck with surprising strength. In the car, Ethan was quiet until they were almost home. Dad? Yeah? Are you happy? The question was so direct, so honest, that Mason had to take a moment before answering. Yeah, buddy, I think I am. Are you? Ethan thought about it. Yeah, Sophie's cool, and Elena's nice, and their apartment is small, but it feels good there, like people actually live in it. Not like ours? Ours is pretty, but it's empty. Even when we're both there, it feels empty. Mason had no good answer for that, because Ethan was right. What if we changed that, he said instead. What if we made our place feel more like theirs? How? I don't know. More pictures on the walls, more life. More of us actually being present instead of just passing through. Ethan nodded slowly. That would be good. Can we get some of those twinkly lights too? The ones Sophie has in her room? Absolutely. They drove the rest of the way planning small changes, pictures to hang, lights to string, a basketball hoop for the roof that would never get used but would make the penthouse feel less like a hotel. That night, Mason tucked Ethan into bed, something he realized he hadn't done in months. "Dad? Yeah? I like how things are changing. Me too. Don't go back to how you were before, okay?" The request was simple but devastating. "I won't, I promise." "Pinky promise?" Mason linked pinkies with his son, the same way he had with Sophie an hour earlier. "Pinky promise." Ethan smiled and rolled over, clutching his dinosaur. Mason stood in the doorway watching him for a long moment before turning off the light. In his own room, Mason found a text from Elena. "Sophie's asking if you're her dad now. I told her it doesn't work like that. She's not convinced. Fair warning." Mason smiled and typed back, "What did you tell her?" "That you're a friend who cares about us." "She said that sounds like what dads do." "I said some friends do that too." "She's still not convinced. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. Makes lying to her harder. Good thing you're a terrible liar. Rude. Also accurate. See you Wednesday?" Wednesday. "And Mason? Thank you. For today. For all of this. For being, I don't know, real. Thank you for letting me." Mason set down his phone and looked around his bedroom. Expensive, perfectly designed, completely soulless. He thought about Elena's cramped apartment with its mismatched furniture and hand-me-down decorations, and the warmth that filled every corner. He thought about Sophie's rock collection and Maria's sharp observations and Ethan's small thumbs up from across the couch. He thought about Elena's hand in his and the way she'd looked at him when he said he liked her, terrified and hopeful in equal measure, just like Maria had said. For the first time in 3 years, Mason Reed went to bed without the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on his chest. He had somewhere to be on Wednesday. Someone waiting for him. Something that felt like the beginning of an actual life instead of just an expensive simulation of one. He had 4 days to not screw it up. He was going to try like hell not to. Wednesday didn't come fast enough, and when it did, it brought complications Mason hadn't anticipated. The trouble started Tuesday morning when his CFO cornered him after a strategy meeting with news that a major client was threatening to pull their contract unless Mason personally flew to Seattle to smooth things over. $3 million a year, gone, unless he got on a plane by Wednesday afternoon. "Tell them I can't make it until Thursday," Mason said, already mentally rearranging his schedule. His CFO blinked. "Thursday might be too late. They're talking to our competitors. If we don't show we're taking this seriously," "I am taking it seriously. I'm also taking my personal life seriously for the first time in 3 years. Tell them Thursday morning, first thing. I'll stay as long as they need, but not Wednesday." The CFO stared at him like he'd announced he was joining a circus. "Mason, this is $3 million. I know what it is, and I know what Wednesday is too. Thursday. That's my offer." She left looking concerned about his mental health, but she made the call. The client agreed to Thursday, though not happily. Crisis averted. Barely. Wednesday afternoon found Mason leaving the office at 3, practically unheard of, to pick up Ethan from school. He'd promised to take both kids to the Science Museum while Elena worked her shift, then they'd all meet up for dinner at her apartment after. Ethan was waiting by the front entrance, and his face lit up when he saw Mason's car instead of Jennifer's usual sedan. "You really came," Ethan said, climbing in. "I said I would." "I know, but—" Ethan trailed off, and Mason heard all the things his son didn't say. "But you usually don't. But work usually comes first. But I've learned not to count on it." "Things are different now," Mason said. "I'm making them different." They picked up Sophie from her school across town, a public elementary that looked like it was held together with duct tape and hope. Sophie came running out in a coat that was definitely too small, her backpack dragging on the ground behind her. "Mason! Ethan!" She threw herself into the car with her usual enthusiasm. "Mama said you're taking us to see science stuff. I've never been to a museum before. Well, except the free one that time with school, but that doesn't count because we only got to stay for an hour and Mrs. Peterson kept yelling at everyone to stay together." The Science Museum was everything Sophie had hoped for, and more. She bounced from exhibit to exhibit, dragging Ethan along, asking approximately 8,000 questions that neither Mason nor Ethan could adequately answer. Why is the moon round but rocks aren't always round? How do fish breathe underwater when we can't? If the earth is spinning, why don't we fall off? What's gravity made of? Ethan tried his best to answer, and when he couldn't, they'd read the placards together, heads bent close. Mason hung back, watching them, taking photos on his phone that he'd probably never look at again, but wanted to capture anyway. At the dinosaur exhibit, Sophie stood in front of a T-Rex skeleton with her mouth open. "That's the biggest chicken I've ever seen," she whispered. "It's not a chicken," Ethan said, grinning. "It's a dinosaur." But Mrs. Peterson said dinosaurs turned into birds, and birds are like chickens, so it's basically a really big old chicken. That's actually kind of accurate. Weird, but accurate. Mason's phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "How's it going? Sophie being too much?" He snapped a photo of Sophie trying to measure her hand against the dinosaur's claw and sent it with the caption, "She's perfect. We're good." Elena's response came quickly. "She's going to want to live at that museum now. Hope you're prepared. Worth it. You're too nice for your own good. Or maybe I just like seeing kids be kids." There was a pause, then, "Thank you. For this. For giving her things I can't afford to give her." Mason frowned and typed back, "You give her everything that matters. I'm just providing dinosaurs. Still, thank you." They spent 3 hours at the museum before Sophie started dragging, her earlier energy depleted. She fell asleep in the car on the way to Elena's apartment, and Ethan helped Mason carry her up the stairs. The elevator was broken again, naturally. Maria opened the door, took one look at sleeping Sophie, and smiled. "Wore her out, did you?" "The dinosaurs did most of the work," Mason said, carrying Sophie to her room. He laid her on the bed, and she stirred just enough to mumble, "Best day ever," before curling around her pillow. Back in the living room, Maria was setting the table while Ethan helped. There was no sign of Elena yet. "She's running late," Maria explained. "Some issue at the diner. She texted saying she'd be home by 6:30. It was barely 6 now. Mason pulled out his phone to check for messages and found one from his executive assistant. "Seattle client moved the meeting up. They want you there tonight instead of tomorrow morning. I can have the jet ready in an hour." Mason stared at the message, his stomach sinking. "Everything okay?" Maria asked, too observant as always. "Work thing? It's fine." He typed back, "Can't do tonight. Tomorrow morning still works." The response came immediately. "They're saying tonight or they walk. I really think you should take this seriously. I am taking it seriously. But I have commitments here. Tomorrow morning, first flight out. That's the best I can do." He put the phone away before he could see the response, knowing it wouldn't be good. Maria was watching him with those sharp eyes. "That looks serious. Client emergency. They want me in Seattle tonight. And you're here instead? I made a commitment to be here, so I'm here." That client going to understand that? Probably not. But they'll live with it. Maria studied him for a long moment. "You know, most men in your position would already be on their way to the airport." "I'm not most men. I'm trying not to be anyway." "Elena's going to feel guilty when she finds out you chose her over work." "Good thing I didn't choose her over work. I chose keeping my word over money. There's a difference." Maria smiled, a real smile, approving. "You might actually be worth the trouble, Mason Reed." "I'm trying." Elena burst through the door at 6:45, flustered and apologetic, still wearing her diner uniform. "I'm so sorry. Some guy decided to argue about his bill for 20 minutes, and then the register broke. And—" She stopped, taking in the scene. Mason at the table, Ethan helping Maria with dinner, everything calm and normal. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed. I thought maybe you'd have to leave. Work emergency or something." Mason's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He ignored it. "No emergency. Just dinner with people I care about." Elena looked like she might cry. "Let me change real quick. I smell like French fries and shame." She disappeared into her room, and Maria caught Mason's eye. "Your phone's been buzzing for 10 minutes straight." "I know. You going to answer it?" "Nope. They're going to keep calling. They'll survive." Ethan looked up from the napkins he was folding. "Is it the Seattle thing? How do you know about Seattle?" "I heard Jennifer talking to your assistant yesterday. She said you were supposed to go tonight, but you refused." Mason sighed. Nothing stayed secret in his world. "Yeah, it's the Seattle thing, but it's handled, or it will be, tomorrow." "What if they don't wait until tomorrow?" "Then they don't, and we'll figure it out." Elena emerged in jeans and a sweater, her hair down, looking more relaxed. "Figure what out?" Nothing important, Mason said before Ethan could answer. What's for dinner? Maria had made chicken enchiladas, the kind where you could tell everything was made from scratch, nothing from cans or packages. They ate around the small table, Sophie joining them halfway through after waking from her nap full of renewed energy and questions about dinosaurs. Did you know, she announced through a mouthful of rice, that the T-Rex probably had feathers? Ethan told me. It's weird, but also kind of cool. Very cool, Elena agreed, shooting Mason a grateful look. Mason's phone buzzed again. Then again. Elena noticed. Do you need to get that? It can wait. Mason, if it's work, it's always work. It can wait. But it couldn't, apparently, because at 7:15 his phone actually rang. Not just a text, but a call from his CFO. I should take this, Mason said reluctantly. I'll be quick. He stepped into the tiny hallway outside the apartment, closing the door behind him. This better be important. His CFO didn't waste time. The Seattle client walked. They signed with our competitor an hour ago. $3 million a year. Gone. Because you wouldn't get on a plane tonight. Mason leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. Okay. Okay. That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? I told them tomorrow morning. They chose not to wait. That's their decision. It's $3 million, Mason, and it makes us look weak, like we don't care about our clients. I care plenty. I also care about my personal life, about keeping commitments to people who matter to me. I told them tomorrow morning that should have been good enough. Since when do you have a personal life? Since when does anything matter more than the company? The question hung there, accusatory and fair. Since I realized the company was killing me, Mason said quietly. Since I realized my son barely knows me. Since I figured out that all the money and success in the world doesn't mean anything if you're too miserable to enjoy it. His CFO was silent for a moment. Are you having a breakdown? Should I be worried? I'm having a breakthrough, and no, you shouldn't be worried. I'll be in tomorrow morning. We'll find other clients. We'll be fine. Mason, I have to go. I'm having dinner with my family. He hung up before she could argue, and the word echoed in his head. Family. He'd said it without thinking, and it had felt right. When he came back inside, everyone was looking at him. Everything okay? Elena asked carefully. Lost a client. $3 million a year. She paled. Because of tonight? Because you're here instead of... Because they wanted me to drop everything and fly to Seattle immediately, and I said tomorrow instead. They didn't like that answer. Mason, you should have gone. We would have understood. Would you have? Or would you have filed it away as more evidence that I'm not reliable? That work always comes first? Elena opened her mouth, closed it. I made a commitment to be here tonight, Mason continued, to take the kids to the museum, to have dinner with you. I'm not breaking that commitment because some client threw a tantrum about having to wait 12 hours. But $3 million is nothing compared to what I'd lose if I kept putting work first and people last. He sat back down, picked up his fork. Can we eat? These enchiladas are getting cold, and they're too good to waste. Maria was smiling into her napkin. Sophie looked confused but delighted by the drama. Ethan was watching his father with something that looked like pride. Elena still looked worried. You're insane. Probably, but I'm insane in here, so that's something. They finished dinner with easier conversation, though Mason could tell Elena was still processing what had happened. After they'd cleaned up, Mason insisted on helping despite Maria's protests. The kids settled in for a movie, and Elena pulled Mason aside into the kitchen. We need to talk about what just happened. Okay. You can't lose millions of dollars because of dinner with us. That's not sustainable. That's not okay. The company has revenue in the billions. We'll survive losing one client. That's not the point. The point is you're making decisions that could hurt your business because of us, because of me. And I can't be responsible for that. Mason turned to face her fully. You're not responsible for my choices. I am. And I chose to honor my commitment to you and the kids over a client who couldn't wait one night. That's not on you. But what if it keeps happening? What if we keep costing you things? Then I'll decide what matters more. And Elena, I'm going to keep choosing you. That's going to scare you, and you're going to keep trying to push me away for my own good. But I need you to hear me. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing a life that includes people I care about over a life that's just endless work. That's not fair. What's not fair? Saying things like that. Making me believe this could actually work. Making me hope. Her voice cracked. I can't afford hope, Mason. Hope is expensive, and I'm already broke. Mason wanted to pull her into his arms, but he held back, giving her space. What if I hope enough for both of us? What if I keep showing up until you believe I'm not going anywhere? What if you can't? What if the company needs you? What if Ethan needs you? What if your whole life pulls you back and we're just a phase you went through? Look at me. Mason waited until she met his eyes. You're not a phase. Sophie's not a phase. What we're building here, it's not temporary. I know you don't believe that yet. You've been disappointed too many times, but I'm going to keep showing up until you do believe it. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Elena laughed, a broken sound. You lost $3 million tonight, and I'd do it again. That's insane. So you keep telling me. They stood there in the cramped kitchen, the sounds of the movie drifting in from the living room, the weight of the conversation settling around them. I'm scared, Elena whispered. I know. I don't know how to do this, how to let you in, how to believe you'll stay. Then don't believe it yet. Just let me keep proving it. Before Elena could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Are you guys fighting? No, baby, Elena said quickly. Just talking. It sounded like fighting. Mama has her fighting voice. I don't have a fighting voice. You do. It gets all squeaky and weird. Are you mad at Mason? Elena sighed. No, I'm not mad at Mason. Is Mason mad at you? No, Mason said. Nobody's mad at anybody. Sophie studied them both with unsettling perception. Then why do you both look sad? We're not sad. We're just... Elena trailed off, clearly not sure how to explain adult anxiety to a 6-year-old. We're figuring things out, Mason supplied. Sometimes that's hard. Oh, okay. Sophie accepted this with the easy resilience of childhood. Can we have ice cream? Grandma said maybe if we asked nicely. Grandma's trying to get out of her diet again, Elena muttered, but she was smiling. Fine, ice cream, but just one scoop. Sophie cheered and ran back to the living room to share the good news. Elena looked at Mason. We're okay? She asked quietly. We're okay. But, Elena, we need to talk about something eventually. What? Where this is going, what we're doing. Because Sophie's not wrong. She asked if I'm going to be her dad, and we can't keep being vague about this. Not with kids involved. Elena paled. She asked you that? She asked you that, according to your text. But the question stands. Mason, we've known each other less than 2 weeks. I know, and I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just saying we should think about it, about what we want this to be. What do you want it to be? Honestly? Everything. I want to wake up in your cramped apartment with Sophie jumping on the bed. I want to help with homework and fix broken elevators and eat dinner at that table every night. I want Ethan to have siblings and Sophie to have a dad who actually shows up and you to have someone who sees how extraordinary you are, even when you're exhausted and wearing French fry smell. Elena's eyes were wet. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it makes me want to believe you, and I can't afford to believe people. What if this time you can? Before she could answer, Maria called from the living room. If you two are done having your Hallmark moment, the ice cream is melting. They rejoined the others, and Mason helped scoop ice cream into mismatched bowls, while Sophie provided detailed instructions on proper ice cream distribution techniques. Ethan gets more because he's bigger, but not too much more because that's not fair, and Grandma gets the least because she's on a diet even though she says she's not, and Mama gets the middle amount, and you get whatever's left, which is probably a lot because we're almost out. That's very specific, Mason said, following her directions. I'm good at ice cream math. They ate ice cream and watched the rest of the movie, Sophie falling asleep again halfway through, this time on Mason's lap instead of Ethan's. Mason didn't move, didn't want to disturb her, just sat there with this small girl trusting him enough to sleep on him. When the movie ended, it was past 9 and Ethan was yawning. We should go, Mason said reluctantly. Elena carefully lifted Sophie from his lap. She's getting too big for me to carry much longer. She's perfect size. You're biased. Completely. At the door, Maria gave Mason a long look. You did good tonight, choosing people over profit. Most men don't know how to do that. I'm learning. Keep learning. These girls are worth it. Elena walked them down to the car. The elevator was still broken, and at the car she hesitated. Thank you for tonight, for the museum, for staying even when you probably should have left. I didn't probably should have done anything. I was exactly where I wanted to be. $3 million, Mason. You keep bringing that up. We'll make it back. We always do. What if your board gets mad? What if they think you're not focused? Then I'll remind them I built this company from nothing, and I can run it however I want. Elena, stop trying to find reasons this won't work. I'm not trying. They just keep appearing. Mason cupped her face gently. Can I kiss you? She blinked, caught off guard. What? Can I kiss you? I've been wanting to all night, but I didn't want to assume. Yes, she interrupted. Yes, you can kiss me. So he did, right there in the parking lot next to his BMW that cost more than her annual salary, with Ethan probably watching from the back seat and Maria definitely watching from the fourth floor window. It was brief, gentle, perfect, and when they pulled apart, Elena was smiling. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I believe you. A little bit, maybe. I'll take it. But if you're going to keep kissing me, we need to have rules about in front of the kids and appropriate timing, and Mason kissed her again, shutting up the anxiety spiral. Rules, he agreed when they broke apart. We can make rules. Tomorrow. Right now, I'm just going to enjoy the fact that you're letting me do this. Don't make me regret it. I won't, I promise. That's a lot of promises you're making. Good thing I plan to keep them all. In the car, Ethan was grinning. You kissed her. I did. Does that mean she's your girlfriend now? I think so. Is that okay with you? It's cool. Sophie's going to freak out when she finds out. Probably. They drove home through quiet streets, and Mason realized he was smiling. Actually smiling, not the professional smile he used for clients or the tired smile he gave employees. A real smile that came from somewhere genuine. At home, he tucked Ethan in, and his son looked up at him seriously. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you for choosing us tonight, for choosing Elena and Sophie. I know it was hard. Mason felt his throat tighten. You're worth it. You've always been worth it. I just forgot for a while. You remember now? I remember now. Good. Because I like having you around, and I think Elena likes it too. I hope so. She does. I can tell. She looks at you the way you look at her, like you're both scared but trying not to be. When did you get so observant? I've had a lot of time to watch people. Being alone makes you good at noticing stuff. Mason's heart broke a little. You're not alone anymore, I promise. Pinky promise? They linked pinkies, and Ethan smiled before closing his eyes. In his own room, Mason's phone was full of messages. His CFO, his assistant, 2 board members wanting to discuss the Seattle situation. He ignored all of them and instead sent a text to Elena. Thank you for tonight, for everything, for letting me in, even though it scares you. Her response came quickly. Thank you for staying, for choosing us. I'm still terrified, but in a good way maybe. Good terrified is progress. Don't let it go to your head. Too late. Impossible man, impossible woman, perfect match. Good night, Mason. Good night, Elena. Sweet dreams. He set the phone down and looked around his bedroom. Still expensive, still empty. But somehow it felt less suffocating than before. Because now he had somewhere else to be. Someone else to think about. Something worth waking up for beyond quarterly earnings and market share. Tomorrow he'd deal with Seattle and angry board members and the mess he'd created by choosing people over profit. Tonight he'd fall asleep thinking about a woman in a cramped apartment who smelled like French fries and hope, and a little girl who collected rocks and decided he was worth saving, and his own son who was learning to trust him again. Tomorrow could bring its problems. Tonight, Mason Reed was exactly where he wanted to be, in his own head, but thinking about people who made him want to be better. It was a start. It was enough. For now, it was everything. The fallout from Seattle hit harder than Mason expected. Thursday morning brought an emergency board meeting, the kind where everyone spoke in carefully measured tones that barely concealed their anger. Mason sat at the head of the conference table in his downtown office, listening to concerns about his recent erratic behavior and declining focus on company priorities. We've lost 3 major clients in the past month, his CFO said, pulling up a presentation Mason definitely hadn't approved. And while the Seattle situation was the most visible, there's a pattern emerging of delayed responses, missed calls, and what several clients have described as a lack of urgency. Is this about the clients or about me leaving the office before 7? Mason asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. His lead investor, a man named Richard Chen, who'd backed Reed Technologies from the beginning, leaned forward. Mason, we're concerned. You built this company with obsessive focus. You were available 24/7. You lived and breathed this business. And now you're leaving early for personal commitments, turning down meetings, losing clients because you won't get on a plane when they need you. What changed? Everything, Mason wanted to say. I remembered I have a son. I met a woman who makes me want to be human again. I realized success without happiness is just expensive misery. But he couldn't say that to a room full of people who measured worth in quarterly returns. I'm restructuring my priorities, he said instead. The company is strong. We have good people. We don't need me micromanaging every decision. We need you present, another board member interjected. We need the Mason Reed who built this empire, not whoever you've become in the last 2 weeks. Maybe the Mason Reed who built this empire was burning out. Maybe he was sacrificing everything that mattered for a company that would replace him in a week if he dropped dead from a heart attack. The room went silent. This isn't sustainable, Mason continued, surprised by his own honesty. Running myself into the ground, missing my son's childhood, having no life outside these walls. I'm making changes. The company will adapt. Or the company will fail, his CFO said bluntly. Mason, I respect your personal growth or whatever this is, but you're the face of Reed Technologies. You're what clients buy into. If you're not all in, they'll go elsewhere. Then we'll find clients who value work-life balance, who understand that humans aren't machines. Richard Chen shook his head slowly. I've known you 10 years, Mason. I've never heard you talk like this. What happened? Mason thought about Sophie asking why he looked so sad, about Elena inviting a stranger to Christmas dinner, about Ethan's face when Mason actually showed up to pick him up from school. I woke up, he said simply. That's what happened. The meeting ended with a compromise Mason hated. He'd commit to being more available, more responsive, but he wouldn't sacrifice his evenings and weekends unless it was truly critical. The board wasn't happy, but they also couldn't deny that Reed Technologies was still profitable, still growing, still dominant in their market. But Mason left that conference room knowing something had shifted. He couldn't be the man they wanted and the man he was trying to become. Something would have to give. His phone buzzed as he walked back to his office. Elena. Sophie's school called. She's sick. Fever. I'm at work and can't leave until my shift ends in 3 hours. Maria's at a doctor's appointment. I don't know what to do. Mason didn't hesitate. I'll get her. Which school? You can't just leave work to... Which school, Elena? She sent the address. Mason grabbed his coat, told his assistant he was leaving for the day, and ignored the looks from his executive team as he walked out. Sophie's school was a 20-minute drive from downtown. Mason found the nurse's office easily enough, and Sophie was curled up in a chair looking miserable, her face flushed with fever. Mason? She looked up confused. What are you doing here? Your mom asked me to pick you up. How are you feeling? My throat hurts, and my head, and everything's too hot. The school nurse looked between them. Are you Sophie's father? I'm a family friend. Her mother is at work and asked me to get her. The nurse hesitated, clearly uncertain about releasing a child to someone who wasn't a parent or legal guardian. Sophie solved the problem by throwing her arms around Mason's neck. He's Mama's boyfriend. It's okay. I want to go with Mason. The nurse raised an eyebrow but checked her records. I'll need to call Ms. Brooks to confirm. She did, and Elena must have given authorization because 5 minutes later, Mason was carrying a feverish 6-year-old to his car. Where are we going? Sophie asked, her voice small and scratchy. My place. It's closer and you need rest. I'll text your mom. Sophie nodded against his shoulder, and Mason realized she was shivering despite the fever. He cranked up the heat in the car and drove carefully back to the Pearl District. Getting Sophie up to the penthouse took some maneuvering. She was too big to carry easily, but too sick to walk steadily. But they managed. Inside, Mason set her on the couch and went to find medicine and a thermometer. This place is really big, Sophie mumbled, looking around with fever-bright eyes. And really quiet. I know, too big and too quiet. You should get a dog. Dogs make noise. That's actually a good idea. He gave her children's ibuprofen and took her temperature. 102.3, high enough to be concerning but not emergency room level. Then he made her tea with honey, the way Maria had made it on Christmas Eve, and set her up with blankets and pillows and a kid's movie on the massive TV she'd barely noticed during their pool visit. Within 20 minutes, she was asleep, and Mason sat watching her, this tiny girl who'd decided he was worth saving, now trusting him enough to sleep in his home while sick. His phone rang. Elena panicked. Is she okay? The nurse said 102 fever. Should I leave work? I can tell my manager it's an emergency. She's okay, Mason said quietly. I gave her medicine. She had some tea, and she's sleeping now. You don't need to leave work. I've got her. Mason, you can't just bail on work to take care of my kid. I just did, and I do it again. But your company, the board, don't you have important... Nothing's more important than this, than her, than you. When are you going to believe that? Elena was silent for a moment. You're going to make me cry at work. Sorry. No, you're not. You're right. I'm not. Mason glanced at Sophie, making sure she was still sleeping. When does your shift end? 4, but I can come get her after. You don't have to. Come here when you're done. I'll order dinner. We'll make sure she's okay together. Mason, please, let me help. Let me be here for you. Another pause. Okay, I'll come at 4. Thank you for everything. Always. After he hung up, Mason realized Ethan would be getting out of school soon. He called Jennifer and explained the situation, asking if she could pick Ethan up and bring him to the penthouse instead of staying at their place. Is everything all right? Jennifer asked, and Mason could hear the concern in her voice. She'd been with them since Ethan was a baby, had watched Mason spiral after Rebecca died, had probably worried he'd never find his way back. Everything's better than all right, Mason said. I'm taking care of someone who needs me, and I'm actually here to do it. Good, Jennifer said softly. It's about time. Sophie woke up around 2, groggy and uncomfortable. Mason got more medicine into her and convinced her to eat some crackers. She curled up against his side on the couch, and he found himself stroking her hair the way he used to do for Ethan when he was little. Mason? Yeah, sweetheart? Are you going to marry my mama? The question caught him off guard. Again. Why do you keep asking that? Because you look at her like the princes look at the princesses in movies. And you make her smile the real way, not the pretend way she does when she's sad, but doesn't want me to know. The real way? Yeah, where her eyes smile too, not just her mouth. Mason's chest tightened. Would it be okay with you if I did marry your mama someday? Sophie thought about it with the seriousness only sick children could muster. Would you be my dad then? I could be if you wanted me to be. What about my real dad? Your real dad is whoever shows up and stays. Blood doesn't make someone a parent. Being there does. Sophie nodded slowly. Then yeah, it would be okay. But you have to promise not to leave. I promise. Pinky promise? They linked pinkies and Sophie seemed satisfied. She fell back asleep, and Mason sat there thinking about the casual way he'd just promised to marry a woman he'd known for 2 weeks, to become a father to a child who wasn't his, to completely upend his carefully controlled life. And the terrifying part was how right it felt. Ethan arrived around 3:30 with Jennifer, who took one look at Sophie sleeping on the couch and smiled. You're good at this, she said to Mason. At what? Being present? Being needed? You've been running from it so long, I wondered if you'd remember how. I'm still figuring it out. You're doing fine. Jennifer squeezed his shoulder. I'll get dinner started. Something mild for the sick one, something normal for everyone else. You don't have to. I want to. Let me help. Ethan sat on the opposite end of the couch from Sophie, quiet and watchful. She okay? He whispered. Just a fever. She'll be fine. Is Elena coming? After work, around 4. Ethan nodded, then said quietly, You left the board meeting for this. How did you? I heard Jennifer on the phone earlier. She said you walked out of an important meeting to get Sophie from school. It was the right thing to do. The board's going to be mad. Let them be mad. This mattered more. Ethan studied his father for a long moment. You really love her, Elena, and Sophie. It wasn't a question, but Mason answered anyway. Yeah, I really do. Good. Because I think they love you too, even if they're scared to say it. Sophie stirred, waking up. She saw Ethan and smiled weakly. Hi. Hi, you look terrible. Thanks. You look like a dinosaur. That doesn't even make sense. I have a fever. Nothing makes sense. They bickered gently, the way siblings might, and Mason watched them with something warm unfurling in his chest. Elena arrived at 4:15, still in her diner uniform, her hair escaping from its ponytail, looking exhausted and worried. How is she? Fever's down to 100.5. She's had medicine, fluids, and crackers. She's okay. Elena dropped onto the couch, gathering Sophie into her arms. Baby, how are you feeling? Better. Mason gave me the good medicine. And Ethan said I look terrible, which means he cares because that's how boys show affection according to Grandma. That's actually accurate, Elena said, smoothing Sophie's hair. Thank you, she said to Mason, for getting her, for taking care of her, for missing work, and stop thanking me. This is what people do when they care about each other. I'm not used to people caring about us. Get used to it. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen. Dinner's ready, chicken soup for Sophie, pasta for everyone else. And I made brownies because sick days require chocolate. They ate around Mason's massive dining table that had probably never hosted a family dinner before. Sophie picked at her soup, still not feeling great, but the color was returning to her cheeks. Ethan and Jennifer kept the conversation going, and Elena slowly relaxed, the worry line smoothing from her face. After dinner, Jennifer left and Maria called to check on Sophie. Then she asked to speak to Mason. You picked her up from school, Maria said without preamble. Her mom needed help. You left work in the middle of the day for a kid who's not even yours. She is mine. Maybe not legally, but she's mine. Maria was quiet for a moment. You know Elena's going to fight this. Fight what? You. Us. This whole thing. She's going to get scared and try to push you away. She's done it before with anyone who gets too close. I'm not going anywhere. That's what they all say. I'm not them. No, Maria agreed. You're not. But she doesn't know that yet. And when she gets scared, really scared, she's going to test you. She's going to look for reasons you'll leave. And when she can't find any, she might try to create them. Why are you telling me this? Because I like you. Because you're good for her and Sophie. Because I don't want you to give up when she inevitably panics and tries to sabotage this. Maria paused. She deserves to be happy. She just doesn't believe she's allowed to be. I'll remind her. Good. Now, let me talk to my granddaughter. Mason handed the phone to Sophie, who immediately launched into a detailed explanation of her fever in Mason's penthouse and how Ethan said she looked terrible but meant it nicely. While Sophie talked, Elena moved to the windows overlooking the city. Mason joined her. Beautiful view, she said quietly. It's just buildings and lights. From up here, it all looks peaceful, like nothing bad is happening down there. That's the problem with being up here. You forget what life is actually like. Elena turned to look at him. Is that what I am to you? A reminder of real life? You're everything to me. That's what you are. Mason, I'm in love with you. The words came out before he could stop them. I know it's fast. I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other. But I'm in love with you, and I'm in love with Sophie, and I want to build a life with you, not up here in this sterile penthouse, somewhere real, somewhere that feels like home. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You can't just say that. I just did. We've known each other 2 weeks. I don't care. You're a billionaire. I'm a waitress. This doesn't make sense. Since when does love make sense? Love? Elena's voice broke. You're talking about love. Mason, you barely know me. You don't know how messy I am, how much debt I have, how many times I've failed at basically everything. I know you invited a sad stranger to Christmas dinner because your daughter thought he looked lonely. I know you work yourself to exhaustion to give Sophie a life you can barely afford. I know you're terrified of hoping for better because you've been disappointed too many times. I know you smell like French fries after work. And you sing off key when you put Sophie to bed, and you're the strongest person I've ever met. That's not enough to build a relationship on. Then what is? What do you need from me to believe this is real? Elena wiped her eyes roughly. I need you to understand what you're signing up for. My life is complicated. Sophie's going to have questions about her real dad. Maria's going to meddle constantly. I have student loan debt from a degree I never finished. I have medical bills from when Sophie was born. I can't afford nice restaurants or fancy vacations or any of the things you're probably used to. I don't want those things. I want you. I want Sophie. I want family dinners in a cramped apartment and broken elevators and rock collections and movie nights where everyone falls asleep halfway through. For how long? A month? 6 months? Until the novelty wears off and you remember you have a whole other life waiting? Mason took her hands. Elena, look at me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not some rich guy slumming it for excitement. I'm a man who was slowly dying inside his own life until your daughter decided I was worth saving. You brought me back to life. Why can't you believe I want to stay? Because everyone leaves, Elena whispered. My dad left when I was 10. Sophie's dad left when she was 2. Every boyfriend I've ever had leaves when things get hard or real or boring. People don't stay. That's just how it works. Then I'll be the first one who does. You can't promise that. Watch me. Before Elena could argue, Sophie called from the couch. Mama, I don't feel good again. They both rushed over. Sophie's fever had spiked again, back up to 102.8. Mason got more medicine while Elena felt her daughter's forehead, her worry visible. Should we take her to the ER? Mason asked. Not yet. If it doesn't come down in an hour, then yeah. Elena looked at him. You don't have to stay. This isn't your... Don't finish that sentence. Where are we going to be more comfortable, here or your place? My place. Sophie's bed, her things. She'll rest better there. Then let's go. They packed up quickly. Mason drove them across town, Elena in the passenger seat, Sophie and Ethan in the back. Sophie dozed fitfully, and Ethan held her hand without being asked. At Elena's apartment building, the elevator was still broken. Mason carried Sophie up 4 flights of stairs, while Elena unlocked the door and Ethan carried their bags. Inside, Maria took one look at the situation and went into efficiency mode. She got Sophie into pajamas and into bed, while Elena prepared a cool bath to bring the fever down. Mason stayed out of the way, feeling useless until Maria handed him a list. Store run. We need more children's ibuprofen, popsicles, and ginger ale. Also grab some real groceries because I know Elena hasn't been shopping in a week. Iguan. Mason took the list and Ethan with him, grateful to have something to do. At the store, they filled a cart with everything on Maria's list, plus extra, juice boxes, crackers, soup, bread, fruit, things he noticed were missing from Elena's sparse refrigerator. You're going to buy them groceries now? Ethan asked. They need them. Elena's going to say you don't have to. I know. I'm doing it anyway. She's going to think you're trying to fix her with money. Mason stopped, looking at his son. When did you get so wise? I pay attention. Jennifer says it's my superpower. Ethan studied the cart. Maybe don't buy too much, like helpful but not overwhelming. Good call. They put back the fancy items, kept the basics. Back at the apartment, Sophie's fever had come down slightly, 101.2. She was in bed with Elena sitting beside her, singing softly. Mason and Ethan unpacked groceries quietly while Maria made tea. You're a good man, Maria said, watching him organize the refrigerator. She's going to keep fighting this, you know. I know. You sure you're ready for that fight? I've been fighting for a company for 10 years. I can fight for a family. Family's harder. Can't just throw money at it when things get complicated. Good thing I'm learning that. Sophie's fever broke completely around midnight. She fell into actual sleep instead of fevered dozing, and Elena finally left her bedside, exhausted. Mason was still there, sitting on the couch with Ethan asleep against his shoulder. Maria had gone to bed hours ago. You're still here, Elena said, sitting beside him carefully so as not to wake Ethan. Where else would I be? Home. Sleeping in your expensive bed, not crammed on my terrible couch waiting for a 6-year-old's fever to break. This is exactly where I want to be. Elena leaned against him, and he wrapped his free arm around her. They sat in silence for a while. I'm sorry, she said finally, for earlier, for freaking out when you said you loved me. You don't have to apologize for being scared. I do have to stop pushing you away every time I get scared. Maria says I do that. Test people until they leave so I can be right about everyone leaving. Maria's smart. She's annoying, but yeah, she's smart. Elena turned to look at him. I'm not ready to say it back yet. The love thing. I need more time. Okay. But I'm trying to believe you. I'm trying to let myself hope this is real. That's enough. That's more than enough. They sat there until Ethan woke up, confused and stiff. Mason carried his son to Sophie's room where they'd set up a sleeping bag earlier. Then he came back to Elena. I should go, let you sleep. Or you could stay. On the couch, if you want. It was the first time she'd asked him to stay. I want. Elena brought him a pillow and a blanket, and Mason settled onto her terrible couch that was too short and too lumpy and absolutely perfect. Good night, Mason. Good night, Elena. She paused at her bedroom door. Thank you. For today. For all of it. Always. Mason woke to the smell of coffee and Maria's voice cutting through the early morning. He's still here, on the couch. Looking uncomfortable as hell, but here. I can hear you, Mason called. Good. Then you can hear me say breakfast is in 10 minutes, and you look like you slept in a pretzel. He definitely felt like he'd slept in a pretzel. But Sophie's fever had stayed down overnight. Elena had checked on her at 3 and 6. And now she was sitting at the table eating toast, pale, but smiling. You stayed all night, she said when Mason emerged from the bathroom. I did. That's what dads do. The statement hung in the air. Elena froze at the stove. Maria kept cooking like nothing had happened. Ethan looked between the adults, waiting to see who would speak first. Yeah, Mason said finally. That's what dads do. Sophie beamed. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Over breakfast, Mason's phone buzzed relentlessly. His assistant, his CFO, board members wanting to know where he was, why he wasn't responding, whether everything was all right. He silenced it. Don't you need to deal with that? Elena asked. It can wait. Mason, you can't just ignore your company. I'm not ignoring it. I'm prioritizing. There's a difference. But Elena looked worried, and Mason knew Maria's prediction was coming true. Elena was looking for reasons to push him away, to prove he'd eventually choose his other life over this one. After breakfast, Mason pulled Elena aside. We need to talk about something. That's never a good way to start a conversation. I need to make some changes. Big ones. Elena paled. You're leaving. What? No, the opposite. Mason took her hands. I'm restructuring the company, hiring a new CEO to handle day-to-day operations, stepping back from the board. I'll still be majority owner, still be involved in major decisions, but I won't be running everything anymore. Mason, you can't do that because of us. I'm doing it because of me. Because I built something successful but unsustainable. Because I want a life outside of conference rooms. Because I have a son who needs me, and a woman I love, and a little girl who's decided I'm worth saving. What if you regret it? What if I don't? What if this is the best decision I've ever made? You barely know us. You can't restructure your entire life for people you barely know. Elena, I know you. Maybe not every detail of your life story, but I know what matters. I know you're kind and strong and terrified of being hurt again. I know you'd rather push away something good than risk being disappointed. I know you love Sophie more than anything and you'd do anything for her. That's what matters. That's not enough. Then what is? Tell me what I need to do to prove I'm staying. Elena pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything you can do because the problem isn't you. It's me. I'm broken, Mason. I've been disappointed so many times that I can't believe in good things anymore. Then let me believe enough for both of us until you can believe it yourself. That's not fair to you. I don't care about fair. I care about us. Sophie appeared in the doorway, still pale, but better. Are you guys fighting again? We're not fighting, Elena said quickly. You have your fighting face on. Mama, don't mess this up. Mason's good. He stayed all night even though our couch is terrible. He bought us groceries. He picked me up from school when I was sick. That's dad stuff. Don't make him leave. Sophie, I mean it. You always say people leave, but maybe they leave because you make it so hard to stay. Maybe if you let people love you, they wouldn't go. The room went silent. Sophie had just said what Maria probably wanted to say, what Mason had been thinking, what Elena needed to hear. That's not fair, baby, Elena whispered. But it's true. You're scared. I get it. But Mason's scared too, and he's still here. Maybe you should be brave like him. Sophie went back to the living room, leaving the adult standing there. She's 6, Elena said, laughing and crying at the same time. She's 6 and she just called me out. She's not wrong. I know. Elena wiped her eyes. I know she's not wrong. I don't know how to do this. How to let you in. How to believe you'll stay. Then just let me keep showing up. That's all I'm asking. Let me keep proving it until you believe it. Elena nodded, and Mason pulled her into his arms. She stood stiff for a moment, then melted against him, and he felt her shake with silent sobs. I'm so tired, she whispered. I'm so tired of being strong and scared and alone. Then let me help. Let me be strong when you can't. Let me be brave enough for both of us. They stood there in the cramped kitchen, holding each other, while the sounds of the kids watching TV drifted in from the living room. The next 3 months weren't easy. Mason restructured the company like he'd promised, which meant endless meetings with lawyers and the board and investors who thought he'd lost his mind. Elena fought him at every step, pushed him away when he got too close, tested him with impossible standards, looked for proof he'd eventually leave. But he kept showing up. He showed up for Sophie's school play, sitting in a folding chair in a gymnasium that smelled like old socks and cheering louder than anyone when she forgot her lines. He showed up when Elena's car broke down, not with a new car, but with a reliable mechanic, and helped paying for repairs in a way that didn't feel like charity. He showed up for Sunday dinners at Maria's, eating her cooking and enduring her interrogations and slowly becoming part of the family. He showed up when Sophie had nightmares and when Ethan struggled with math homework, and when Elena cried because the rent was due and she was $50 short. He showed up. And slowly, painfully slowly, Elena started to believe. 6 months after that Christmas Eve, Mason bought a house. Not a mansion or a showpiece, but a real house in a good neighborhood with a yard for the kids and a kitchen big enough for family dinners and enough bedrooms for everyone to have their own space. He proposed to Elena on a Tuesday evening, nothing fancy, just the two of them in her cramped apartment after Sophie had gone to bed. Marry me, he said, not because I have money or because I can give Sophie a better life. Marry me because I love you, because you make me want to be better, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Elena cried, which he'd expected, but then she said yes, which he'd hoped for but hadn't dared to count on. They were married 3 months later in the backyard of their new house, with Sophie as flower girl and Ethan as best man, and Maria crying while pretending she wasn't. It was small and simple and perfect. The house filled up quickly with life, Sophie's rock collection expanding to take over an entire bookshelf, Ethan's soccer trophies on the mantle, family photos covering every wall. The expensive penthouse sold, and Mason didn't miss it once. Elena kept working at the diner despite Mason's protests, though she cut back to part-time and started taking community college classes again. Sophie thrived with a yard to play in and a father who showed up to everything. Ethan slowly transformed from a quiet, watchful kid into someone who laughed easily and brought friends home. And Mason learned that success wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or market share or how many billions you'd accumulated. It was measured in Sophie's rock collection and Ethan's soccer games and Elena's off-key singing and family dinners where everyone talked over each other. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Mason and Sophie returned to the cafe where they'd first met. It had become their tradition, looking for someone who needed what Sophie had given Mason that snowy evening. They found an elderly woman sitting alone, nursing cold coffee, looking lost. Sophie approached without hesitation. "Excuse me, why do you look so sad?" The woman looked up, surprised. My husband passed away last month. This was his favorite cafe. I didn't want to spend Christmas alone." Sophie looked at Mason, then back at the woman. "No one should be alone on Christmas. That's what my grandma says. Would you like to come have dinner with us? We have turkey, and it's probably going to be dry, but Mama makes really good mashed potatoes." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." "It's not imposing," Mason said gently. "It's tradition. Someone invited me to dinner last year when I needed it. We'd like to pass it on." The woman came to dinner, and she laughed at Sophie's stories and cried when Elena hugged her and left with Maria's phone number and an invitation to next week's Sunday dinner. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the dishes were done, Mason and Elena stood in their backyard looking at the Christmas lights they'd strung up together. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Giving up your old life for this?" "Every single day," Mason said seriously. Elena's face fell until he continued. "I regret not doing it sooner. I regret wasting 3 years being miserable when I could have been here with you." "That's not funny. It's not meant to be. Elena, I spent 10 years building an empire, and the whole time I was just existing, surviving, going through motions. You taught me how to actually live. I didn't teach you anything. Sophie decided you looked sad and invited you to dinner. And you let her, even though you were terrified, even though you had every reason to say no. You invited a stranger into your home because your daughter thought he needed saving." Mason pulled her close. "You saved my life. You and Sophie and Maria and this whole chaotic, messy, perfect family. I'd give up every dollar I have before I'd give up this. You're ridiculous. I'm happy. There's a difference." Elena smiled and kissed him, and somewhere in the house, Sophie yelled that she couldn't sleep because Ethan was snoring, and Ethan yelled back that he wasn't even asleep yet, and Maria yelled at both of them to quiet down or she'd come up there. It was loud and chaotic, and nothing like the silent penthouse Mason used to call home. It was everything. Because somewhere between that Christmas Eve cafe and this backyard full of lights and noise and love, Mason Reed had learned the most important lesson of his life, that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or quarterly returns. It was measured in people who waited for you at dinner, in kids who felt safe enough to be loud, in a woman who'd been hurt too many times but chose to be brave anyway. It was measured in showing up, in keeping promises, in being present instead of perfect. And on that Christmas Eve, standing in his backyard with his wife in his arms, and his children fighting in the house, and his mother-in-law threatening them with a wooden spoon, Mason Reed was the richest man alive. Not because of the money he'd made or the company he'd built, but because he'd finally learned that the best things in life weren't things at all. They were people. Messy, complicated, beautiful people who chose to let you in despite every reason not to. And that was worth more than all the billions in the world.